Chapter 4:11. Kireen almost tripped when it heard the curious guesses behind it. What an ignorant kid. It was a male, not a female. The little Chileen fiercely swung its tail and shook its ears, allowing its horns to be more fully exposed. It was a male Kireen, and its horns had 3 forks. However, a female Kireen only had 2 forks. Look, Kireen is wagging its tail. It must agree with me. It is a female. Maya Hay always wags its tail when I guess its meaning correctly. The kid was very happy. Kireen wanted to slap him with its tail. I am a male. Kireen's roar was magnificent. It attracted more onlookers, and the discussion became louder. Wow, it can talk. It can hear us talking. That's great. Yes, its voice sounds so young. I guess it is only 7 or 8 years old, such a young Kireen. The question of Kireen's gender was clarified, but because of its response, there were more guesses and discussions. It was even more lively than before. Some even began to guess that Kireen was an illegitimate child, and that was why it was wandering alone in the world. It had to be said that people's spirit of gossip was endless, and their imagination was huge. While Ning Shuamore rode the little Chileen back home, there were already many different versions of the story. The most ridiculous version was that Kireen was Ning Shuamore's illegitimate child in her previous life, and Kireen was looking for its mother, so it didn't mind that Ning Shuamore recognized him as its master. Kireen's ears were very sharp, and it heard most of the discussions. It was speechless. There were too many wild guesses, and it couldn't clarify them one by one. Master, did you hear what those people said? They are not right at all. Ning Shuamore raised her hand and rubbed Kireen's head. Good boy, they are talking about you, which means that you are very attractive to them. Why didn't you hear them talk about it when you were a cat? But I don't like them making wild guesses. I want to clarify, little apple, they're not talking about you for the truth at all. If you clarify this, they'll soon guess that it's that. There are so many people and so many mouths. Which one will you clarify? The more you clarified and argued with them, the more interested they would be. Even if they didn't want to guess, they would join in the discussion because of your response. Actually, they don't have any ill intentions towards you. They're just curious. You don't have to worry about it. Kireen seemed to understand, but he was still unhappy. But many of their guesses are wrong. Well, it's enough that you and your friends know the truth. You don't have to explain it to everyone. Kireen seemed to have understood something and stopped talking. This conversation was between Ning Shuamore and Kireen using telepathy. No one else could hear it. The leader of the guards behind Ning Shuamore was Shi Tianlong. He was ordered to follow beside Ning Shuamore and looked at her with a complicated gaze. He admired this girl very much. But he also unintentionally did a few things that hurt her, such as capturing her at the banquet last night and monitoring her today. Although he was forced to do so, he still felt sorry for her in his heart. He felt guilty. Ning Shuamore finally returned to the Marquis Jingyuan's mansion. Ning Shuamore turned around and bowed to Shi Tianlong. General Shu, I have returned to the mansion. There's no need to send me off. Chapter 4:12. Shi Tianlong blushed and said, Marquis Ning, I'm sorry. His Majesty asked me to stay here and protect you for a few days. I dare not disobey the Emperor's orders. It was just as she had expected. It seemed like Emperor Le Xian was afraid that she would change her mind and run away midway. Therefore, he sent people to monitor her residence until the day of the wedding. Ning Shuamore nodded and didn't say anything else. She rode the little Chileen into the palace. Shi Tianlong waved his hand and the guards dispersed. They must be looking for a good place to hide. Shi Tianlong braced himself and followed Ning Shuamore into the house. Ning Shuamore was a little puzzled. Old Zhong was a very good person. Every time she came back, he would lead a group of servants to welcome her at the door. This time, she did not know what was going on. She had already entered the house, but he did not come out to welcome her. She did not even see anyone else. She faintly felt that something was wrong. When she entered the hall, she immediately felt uncomfortable. There was a person sitting on the main seat in the hall. His black hair was loose and his green robe was tattered. There were a few orchids on his green robe that danced with his movements. Han Shan Yu. Why did he come to her house? He even sat on the main seat without any hesitation. Ning Xuemo's eyes fell on the bottom of his green robe. He was wearing a pair of wooden clogs. He looked very comfortable and casual. Old Zhong was instructing 2 maids to wipe the furniture in the hall. They wiped it until it was spotless and even a fly would slip on it. Of course, there were no flies in the hall. When Ning Xuemo came in, Han Shanyu looked up at her and said, "You're finally back?" He sounded like the male owner of the house. "Why are you here?" Ning Xuemo's tone was not good. "The Taoist master's residence is being repaired. I've been here for a few days." Han Shanyu answered naturally. "I didn't invite you." Ning Xuemo was not polite. "You are my concubine. Your residence is my residence. Why do I need you to invite me? I'm not your concubine now. She might not be in the future, very soon." Han Shanyu answered casually, but it hit Ning Xuemo's weak spot. Ning Xuemo took a deep breath. She was a calm person. She was not angry. She was not angry. Damn it. It would be strange if she was not angry. Master Han, even if I marry you in 10 days, we are still not married yet. According to the customs of Vast Sky Empire, unmarried couples are not allowed to see each other 1 month before the wedding. Ning Xuemo tried to reason with him. She had to chase him away so that she would have a chance to escape. "I'm not from Vast Sky Nation, and neither are you. There's no need to follow the customs of Vast Sky Nation. Furthermore, we are not engaged. You are only my concubine." Han Shanyu stretched out his legs and rested his chin on his palm. His fingers tapped on the table in boredom. His posture was indescribably lazy, yet indescribably attractive. The maid who was wiping the utensils in the hall would sneak glances at him from time to time. Her eyes were almost sparkling. Ning Xuemo wanted to curse. Concubine, your sister." "Master Han, you are wrong. Although you are not from Vast Sky Nation, I am from Vast Sky Nation. Since I am, I have to follow the rules of Vast Sky Nation. Are you sure you are?" Han Shanyue's eyes were fixed on her body. Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that this person knew something? I am. She was not confident when she said this. Han Shanyu seemed to smile and did not talk to her anymore. He turned to old Zhong and asked, "Is my residence ready?" Chapter 413. Old Zhong looked at his master, then looked at the seemingly lazy but powerful master Han Shanyu. He was slightly troubled. I'm already packing it up." Ning Xuemo's face darkened. "Old Zhong, did I say I wanted him to stay?" Old Zhong coughed and said sincerely, "Master, since he will be your husband sooner or later, then he's the master of the house. You don't have to care so much." He was actually really happy for Ning Xuemo. Ever since the name Heavenly Calamity Star spread throughout the capital, old Zhong had been worried about Ning Xuemo's future marriage. He was really worried. If Ning Xuemo could not get married, how could he face Marquis Ning and his wife after 100 years? He did not expect that this master Han Shanyu would take in his master. Although she would only be a concubine, it was still better than his master being a spinster for the rest of her life or marrying a blind or bald man. Moreover, this Han Shanyu was so famous that his status was even higher than Ji Yunhuang and the others. What was even more rare was that he did not have any other women by his side. His master's status in marrying him was not high, but it was the same as being his official wife. Old Zhong was sincerely happy that his master was able to get such a good marriage. His master's current state was probably due to a little girl's embarrassment. It was normal for a little girl to be a little pretentious. Old Zhong expressed his understanding, so he could not help but say a few words. He was afraid that Ning Xuemo was not sensible and would anger this Master Han and break up this good marriage. Ning Xuemo also knew that she could not chase him out even if she wanted to. This person's skin was much thicker than she had imagined. She coldly said, "As long as we are not married, he is not my husband, and he is not the master of the house. However, since this Mr. Han has nowhere to go, we will take him in for a few days in the spirit of humanity. Clean up the cold fragrance courtyard for him. It is suitable for him to live there." Old Zhong was a little troubled. Master Han has already chosen a place to live. It is at the Tide Listening Pavilion. The cold fragrance courtyard is not suitable for people to live in. Master was too negligent. The cold fragrance courtyard had a nice name, but it was actually a deserted courtyard. There were many weeds inside, and many old furniture was left in the courtyard. Even ordinary guests could not be entertained there. Not to mention a guest like Master Han, Tide Listening Pavilion. Wasn't that right next to where he lived? Ning Xuemore's expression turned even uglier. Before she could say anything, a maidservant ran in and reported, "Heavenly Master, the Tide Listening Pavilion has been cleaned up. As per your orders, everything in the pavilion has been replaced with new ones and cleaned 6 times with clean water." Han Shanyu nodded slightly and finally stood up. Without looking at Ning Xuemore, he walked out. Ning Xuemore really wanted to kick his butt. How dare he come to her house and be so misophobic? She secretly clenched her fists. Karine sensed her emotional fluctuations and hurriedly comforted her. "Master, calm down. You are not his opponent. You will only be at a disadvantage if you attack him. Besides, you have so many houses here, one more person won't be a big deal. Just treat it as if you are raising an extra pig." Ning Xuemore was originally so angry that she wanted to explode, but when she heard the little Chaline's telepathic message, she almost burst out laughing. "Yes, just treat it as if we are raising an extra pig." Just as they were talking, Han Shanyu, who had already walked to the door, suddenly turned around and his gaze landed on Karine. Chapter 4:14. After all, Karine had a guilty conscience, so it looked back at him warily. "Little apple, right? Yes. Yes. What can I do for you?" Karine tried its best to remain calm. It did not know why, but it had a bone-deep fear of this man, as if it had been taken advantage of by him before. "Since you have recognized her as your master, then I will be your master in the future. I have prepared a gift for you." Han Shanyue's voice was still kind. Karine was still a child, so when it heard that there was a gift, its eyes lit up. "What gift?" Han Shanyu waved his sleeve, and a faint white light flashed. A rectangular crystal trough appeared on the ground, sparkling and translucent. It was quite beautiful. "Little apple, this is a gift from me. You can use it to eat in the future." After saying this, he turned around and walked out. Karine looked at the crystal trough and felt that there was something strange about it, but it could not pinpoint what was strange about it. It had a curious personality, so it could not help but sniff it and touch it with its little paws from time to time. Ning Xuemore's lips twitched. Wasn't this a trough for pigs? But it was made of crystal. But even if it was made of crystal, it was still a trough for pigs. She kindly explained to the little Chaline, and the little Chaline immediately jumped away and stayed far away from the crystal trough. Too hateful. He actually wants to feed a dignified Karine like a pig. It suddenly thought of something and asked timidly, "Master, could it be that he can eavesdrop on our telepathic conversation?" Did it even need to be said? Ning Xuemore nodded solemnly. How powerful was this person's kung fu? He could actually hear the telepathic conversation between her and Karine. Ning Xuemore never underestimated her opponents, but she realized that she had underestimated this person. His kung fu was like the deep sea, and she could not measure his depth at all. She could not help but raise her hand to rub her forehead. It seemed that it would be difficult for her to escape in the future. She and Karine looked at each other and saw the words difficult, difficult, difficult in each other's eyes. Karine's gaze suddenly landed on Ning Xuemore's face, her large eyes filled with curiosity. "Master, why is there a cinnabar mole on your forehead?" "Huh?" Ning Xuemore raised her hand to touch between her eyebrows. She didn't feel anything, so she immediately looked for a mirror. She looked at herself in the mirror and was stunned. There was indeed a small cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. The cinnabar mole was hexagonal and shaped like a snowflake. It was neatly placed between her eyebrows and added a lot of color to her small face. The cinnabar mole wasn't visible on the surface of her skin, but rather seemed to have been drawn on with a brush. Ning Xuemore raised her hand and rubbed it. It was still slightly warm. She remembered the ball of lightning that had suddenly struck her forehead. This thing couldn't have been created by the lightning, right? What did this mark represent? She had read in some fantasy male novels in her previous life that some male protagonists were struck by lightning. In the end, they were struck by lightning and became a genius. From then on, they were invincible in the three realms. They even fought their way out of the universe and out of the solar system. Would it be the same for her? She tried to circulate her psychokinesis, but it didn't seem to have increase. She tried to wash it with water, but no matter what she did, it couldn't be washed off. It was like a tattoo. Ning Xuemore carefully recalled what happened before the lightning struck. Suddenly, her body froze. It seemed that she had just agreed to Han Shanyue's marriage when the ball of lightning struck. Could this cinnabar mole be the mark of her marriage? Chapter 4:15. It can't be that perverted, right? Ning Xuemore summoned a knowledgeable maid and asked her if a woman in this world would receive a heavenly omen if she accepted someone's proposal. For example, being struck by lightning. The maid shook her head and said she had never heard of such a thing. After sending the maid out, Ning Xuemore rubbed the cinnabar mole between her eyebrows and felt a little tired. Forget it, let's not think about this anymore. There were too many strange things that had happened to her and this one was not a big deal. She walked out of the door but did not find Shi Tianlong, who had been guarding the door. She walked around the manor but did not find any traces of the other imperial guards. She was a little puzzled and called old Zhong to ask. Old Zhong reported to her, "Little mistress, General Shi and the rest were sent away by Mr. Han." Ning Xuemore was speechless. Weren't Shi Tianlong and the rest ordered to protect her? How could they be sent away so easily by Mr. Han? Her expression did not look too good. This was obviously her territory, but that person did not dare to force his way in and even used her authority as the owner. How could he? Ning Xuemore felt that her position was in danger. She sneered, "Who does he think he is? Sending people away for me so easily? I'm your future husband." A faint voice sounded behind her. Ning Xuemore turned her head and saw Han Shanyu leisurely strolling towards her from the other end of the path. He stopped about 10 meters away from her. "Those people were only ordered to keep an eye on you and not let you escape for the next 10 days. I found them annoying and sent them away for you. Why? Are you not satisfied? Mr. Han, please remember that this is my home. If I want to send someone away, I don't need to trouble you." Ning Xuemore did not want to talk to him anymore and turned to leave. Han Shanyu stood there and didn't say anything else. He only looked at her back with a look of contemplation. Old Zhong held his breath as he stood to the side. Although it was broad daylight and the sun was shining brightly, Mr. Han's face was clearly exposed, but he still couldn't see his face clearly. After all, Old Zhong was a knowledgeable man. He knew that there was a type of martial art called face concealing technique in this world. It could cover one's face without a mask, making it impossible for others to see it clearly. Even if they did see it clearly, it wouldn't leave an impression in their mind and they would forget it in the blink of an eye. In order to cultivate this kind of martial arts, one needed to be at least at Earth rank level 9. There were not many people on this continent who could reach this level. One could count them on one's fingers. This kind of top-notch expert actually became the beloved guest of the Marquis of Jingyuan's estate. Old Zhong was happy for his young master from the bottom of his heart. Seeing that his young master did not give the Venerable One any face and left in a huff, he was afraid that the Venerable One would hold a grudge against his young master, so he hurriedly said, "Mr. Han, my master has encountered too many things recently, so her temperament is a little strange. Actually, she's usually quite easy to talk to, and her temperament is also very gentle. She had a gentle temperament. She was just a facade, wasn't she? Deep down, she was a rebellious little fox." Han Shanyu turned around and sat down on a stone bench at the side. His eyes turned to old Zhong. "What happened to her recently? Why don't you tell us?" He sat there under a flowering tree. There were countless petals on the tree that fluttered down in the autumn wind, but not a single one landed on his body. They didn't even dare to float in his direction. Chapter 4:16. He had an aura that made people hold their breaths in front of him, not daring to breathe too loudly. Of course, they didn't dare to lie. Old Zhong didn't trust people easily, but he inexplicably trusted this Master Han. He respectfully told him about the things that Ning Shuamore had encountered recently. Of course, he only told him what he knew. Han Shanyu listened to him without saying a word. He knew some of these things, but he didn't know some of them. Ning Shuamore was exhausted last night by the old emperor's lobbyists. Not long after she returned to the residence, she went to her room to sleep. This sleep was exceptionally sweet, lasting from 10 o'clock in the morning until evening. When she woke up, she opened her eyes and found that the light of the setting sun had shone through the curtains and was shining on a person in front of the window. That person's back was facing her, and he was drawing on a table under the window. The sunlight coated his body with a layer of golden light, making him look very elegant and beautiful. However, the moment Ning Shuamore saw him, the beautiful sleep that she had just had flew away. She sat up abruptly. "Why are you here?" Ning Shuamore had always been very particular about where she slept and paid attention to privacy. She didn't allow anyone to enter her room. She even set up a spell outside her room. If anyone wanted to enter her room, they would have to break through the spell first. If someone tried to break through the spell, there was no way that she wouldn't know. That person was naturally Han Shanyu. He didn't answer Ning Shuamore's question, but instead raised the painting in his hand. "How did you meet him?" When Ning Shuamore saw the painting clearly, her heart skipped a beat. The painting was of a man in red. He had beautiful facial features, elegant demeanor, and his red clothes were as dazzling as the morning sun. It was Shui Ilan. That red-clothed Evildor had been drawn into 3 parts by Han Shanyu with a single stroke. It was as if he could walk out of the painting immediately. "You saw him?" Ning Shuamore blurted out. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, it would have been impossible for him to draw it so accurately. A dark light flashed through Han Shanyue's eyes. He asked again, "How did you meet him?" His voice seemed to have lowered by 2 degrees. Ning Shuamore ignored him. She stretched on the bed and said lazily, "Why do you care how I met you?" She lifted the quilt and wanted to get out of bed. Han Shanyu waved his sleeve, and a faint white light flashed. Ning Shuamore's body stiffened. Damn it, she couldn't move again. She was trying to get off the bed, but halfway through, he used the body-fixing spell on her. Her body leaned forward, and one of her legs was below her. This position was extremely uncomfortable. Ning Shuamore angrily looked up and saw Han Shanyu slowly walking towards her. Ning Shuamore's heart beat wildly from the inexplicably powerful aura emanating from his body. She glared at him. "You! What are you doing?" He walked closer step by step and finally stopped in front of her bed. He was less than half a meter away from her, a very dangerous distance. He looked at her condescendingly and slowly spat out 3 words. "What do you think?" His posture was too dangerous. A faint fragrance surrounded her, as if he could push her down at any time. Ning Shuamore couldn't move. Otherwise, she would have already shrunk to the corner of the bed. He slowly bent down and slowly reached out his hand to her. Ning Shuamore was shocked. He wouldn't take her now, right? "Han Shanyu, don't mess around. We haven't married yet, you can't." Her shout was cut off by his outstretched finger. Chapter 417. His white jade-like middle finger touched the space between her eyebrows as his voice echoed in her ears. "Ning Shuamore, I don't have much patience. Since you don't want to tell me, I can only personally obtain it." His finger was slightly cold, as if there was a weak current flowing from his fingertip and into her brain from her forehead. Ning Shuamore felt a loud bang in her head. The images of Shui Ilan in her memory were like flowing water, forcefully opened by a force and replayed in her mind. After a while, Han Shanyu retracted his finger and released the body-fixing technique on Ning Shuamore. Han Shanyue's expression was not good and his voice was slightly cold. "So that's how you released that scourge. You really are a troublemaker. If I had known earlier, I would have." He suddenly stopped talking because Ning Shuamore was rushing towards him. The cold light in front of his eyes was dazzling as it went straight for his chest. Han Shanyu didn't seem to expect that she would suddenly attack him. His body leaned to the side, and with a flip, he dodged her blade and grabbed her wrist. "Are you crazy?" Ning Shuamore did not say anything and used her other hand to hit his head. "Bastard, go to hell." Han Shanyu had to restrain her other hand as well. The difference in their kung fu was too great. Ning Xuemor's kung fu was not on the same level as his. In the blink of an eye, her body was restrained by him and she could not move. Ning Xuemor, what are you doing? Han Shanyu frowned and looked at her. He did not understand where her killing intent came from. Ning Xuemor was so angry that her whole body was trembling. Although her body could not move, her eyes stared fiercely at him. You pervert, peeping Tom, kill me. He did not ask for her permission and directly read her memories. He did not care about her privacy at all. What did he think she was? A vessel? Han Shanyu, Ning Xuemor's blood rushed to her head, and she continued to scold. So what if you're skilled in martial arts? Do you think you can do whatever you want to others? What right do you have to read my memories? Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? This was probably the first time in his life that Han Shanyu had been scolded like this. He was startled and frowned again. I did not retrieve all of your memories, only the ones related to Shui Ilan. He could even read all of her thoughts. Ning Xuemor's pretty face flushed red with anger. You can't just take a part of it. This is an invasion of privacy, do you understand? Don't say that you're my fiancé, even if you're my biological father, you can't do it. She was already feeling aggrieved when she was forced to agree to this marriage. Now that this matter had become the fuse, she simply exploded. Not only was her face flushed red, but her eyes were also misty with tears. Seeing her like this, Han Shanyu paused for a moment before saying, in this world, the strong are respected. If you don't want your privacy to be violated, then become strong. He turned around and walked out. When he reached the door, his footsteps stopped again. I'm not interested in your privacy. I won't do it again in the future. His sleeves fluttered, and in a moment, he was far away. Not long after, Ning Xuemor finally regained her freedom. She slowly sat down on the bed and closed her eyes. She had to think of a way to escape. Otherwise, she would be invisible in front of him in the future. She sat on the bed for a while, and her rationality slowly came back. Thinking of her outburst just now, she suddenly shivered. Chapter 4:18. She actually lost her mind and scolded this powerful person in front of him. She even stabbed him with a knife. Master Han's martial arts were too high, he could kill her with just a raise of his hand. When she was scolding him, she could even feel the killing intent from him. It was too irrational for her to provoke him like this now. Ning Xuemor was not someone who could be easily angered, but she didn't know why she couldn't control her temper in front of this person. She sat for a while and suddenly thought of something. She ran to the door and her heart sank. The array outside her door was still there, untouched. But he just walked out like he was taking a stroll in the park, treating her array like it was nothing. It seemed that he could come and go as he pleased. There were no more secrets in her room. Ning Xuemor's veins on her forehead throbbed in pain. This person's temper was too unpredictable. What if he came to her room in the middle of the night? She shivered. Ning Xuemor obviously worried too much. From that day onwards, Ning Xuemor did not enter her room. In the residence, Ning Xuemor rarely bumped into him. Even if she bumped into him, he would just nod slightly and walk past her. Just like the saying, mutual respect was as cold as ice. These few days, Ning Xuemor's life was relatively peaceful and orderly. Every day, besides refining medicine, practicing martial arts, and reading books, she also liked to go out shopping. He traveled to the east, strolled to the west, shopped to the pharmacy, shopped to the clothing store, shopped to the utensils. There was no place that she couldn't go. 2 days ago, she often heard gossip about herself on the streets, but when a topic was talked about for a long time and there was no real follow-up, people gradually lost interest. There was no lack of gossip in the streets, but recently, people's topic was attracted by another matter. Recently, there were often young girls going missing in the capital. In 6 days, 8 young girls had already gone missing. These young girls had all kinds of identities. There was a daughter of a rich family, a pretty girl from a small family, and a prostitute from a music studio. These girls went missing in different places. Some went missing at home, some went missing when they went out to buy things, and one even went missing when she went out to play with her fiancé. Ning Xuemor didn't care much about this kind of missing persons case. Since ancient times, there had been no shortage of such cases. It was most likely that some human trafficking group had come to the city and abducted these young girls to be sold. This kind of missing persons case was the most difficult. If she was free, she might even help the public get rid of the evil, search for clues, and find out who was behind this. But now, as the wedding date approached, her mind was filled with thoughts of escaping. Although she did not have many chances to meet Han Shanyu these days, it did not mean that he was not secretly watching her. Therefore, she came out to wander around every day. Firstly, she wanted to dispel his wariness. Secondly, she wanted to see if he had any methods to spy on her. She didn't believe that he would send those guards back and let her escape. He must have some way to monitor her. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy could you win 100 battles. Only by knowing his methods could she plan her escape route. Ning Xuemore didn't know if it was because he was too good at monitoring her, or because he didn't pay attention to her whereabouts at all, but she didn't notice him following her even once. Not to mention him, she didn't even have any guards. Ning Xuemore's anti-tracking skills were superb. If someone was following her, she could detect it in a moment. No one could escape her intuition. Chapter 419. For the past few days, she did not feel anyone following her. In order to test the waters, Ning Xuemore purposely returned home late at night. When she returned, the mansion was quiet. The servants were doing their own things. Some were patrolling, some were resting. Only the loyal old Zhong was waiting for her at the entrance of the mansion. When he saw her return safely, he was relieved. He was worried that something had happened to her. She pretended to ask about the situation in the mansion. Old Zhong replied that nothing had happened in the mansion. Mr. Han also came back and went out regularly. Moreover, he would only stay in his own courtyard and would not go anywhere else. He never asked about Ning Xuemore's whereabouts. Young master, forgive me for asking, but what happened between the two of you? He felt that something had happened between his master and Mr. Han. They were in a cold war. Ning Xuemore seemed to be relieved. She waved her hand and said, "Nothing." Then she walked inside. "Young master, it's better if you don't go out for the next few days. It's not peaceful outside. You don't bring anyone with you. I'm worried." Ning Xuemore turned to look at him and said, "Uncle Zhong, you also heard about the missing girls?" "Yes, I heard that 7 of them went missing. They can't be found anymore." Old Zhong was worried. "Don't worry, I won't go missing. If they really go missing." Ning Xuemore blinked her eyes and said, "I won't let Uncle Zhong worry about me." Old Zhong couldn't help but sigh. "Young master, I know that you're skilled and brave, but I heard that there were many psychokinesis masters among the missing girls. Some of them were even called geniuses. Even the emperor was furious and ordered the authorities to investigate." "Okay, I know. I'll be careful." Ning Xuemore stretched again and said, "Uncle Zhong, I'm so tired. You don't have to talk anymore. Go and rest. It's getting late." She did not want to listen to Uncle Zhong's nagging and quickly went back to her courtyard. Her courtyard was right next to Han Shanyue's courtyard. When she went back to her courtyard, she passed by his courtyard. Perhaps this Master Han was truly skilled and daring. Regardless of whether he was in the courtyard or not, the courtyard door was always half open and never closed. When Ning Xuemore passed by his courtyard, she casually glanced inside and paused for a moment. Han Shanyu was sitting under a grape trellis in the courtyard, admiring the moon and painting. Rather than admiring the moon, it was better to say admiring the stars. Because it was close to the end of the month, there was only a crescent moon left on the moon. The moonlight was dim, but the stars in the sky were bright. He was sitting on a rattan chair, holding a cup in one hand and tapping the rattan chair with the other. He looked very relaxed. The hazy starlight outlined his silhouette in the moonlight, giving him a hazy sense of beauty. Absolutely stunning. Poetic and picturesque. Ning Xuemore immediately thought of these 2 words. Although she didn't like this kind of handsome man, it didn't mean that she didn't appreciate it. At this moment, Ning Xuemore seemed to have forgotten her usual disgust for him. She looked at him with pure appreciation for a few seconds. This person's temperament was really unparalleled. Just by casually lying down, he was like a pleasing painting. No wonder so many girls were crazy for him. He really did have some capital. If he wasn't so hateful, she might have been attracted to him. She was suddenly shocked. What was she thinking? She didn't like this type. How could she be attracted to him? Chapter 420. She shook her head and was about to leave when Han Shanyu, who was half lying on the rattan chair, seemed to have sensed something and suddenly turned to look at her. Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat. Although she couldn't see his face clearly, she could feel that his gaze was on her body. Their gazes met for a brief moment. Ning Xuemo calmly nodded her head at him, which could be considered a greeting. She then turned around to leave. Wait. The person in the courtyard suddenly spoke, his voice as cold as ever. What's the matter? Ning Xuemo stopped, still standing outside the door. Come in and talk. Are you afraid that I'll eat you? It's late at night. It's not very convenient for a man and woman to be alone. Master, if you have something to say, just say it. Ning Xuemo did not move. You still care about this? Han Shanyue's voice was flat, and she could not tell if he was happy or angry. But Ning Xuemo felt that his tone was a little sarcastic. She was too lazy to pay attention to it and turned to leave. Her feet seemed to be pulled by something, and she could not help but fall back, directly into his courtyard. The force pulling her back was too great. She simply couldn't control it. In the end, when she was about to fall back to his rattan chair, the force suddenly loosened and disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuemo almost fell on him. She hurriedly used a stake to stabilize herself. You! She looked at him angrily. At this moment, she was less than 2 feet away from him. It was a very dangerous distance, and she could smell the special fragrance on his body. We are engaged, so it's very convenient for a man and a woman to be alone. Han Shanyu said slowly, and pointed to the stone bench next to him. Sit there. Ning Xuemo secretly took a breath. The gap between their strengths was too big, and it was not appropriate for her to fight with him face to face. She calmed herself down, sat down on the stone bench, and looked at him. What do you want? Why are you speaking so stiffly to me? Han Shanyu put one elbow on the armrest of the rattan chair. Half of his head was propped up, and his black hair flowed down like water. He looked less cold and more lazy. He dragged her in like this, and he still expected her to talk to him nicely. How shameless was he? Ning Xuemo's voice was also cold. Then how do you want me to talk to you? Although we are engaged, you don't treat me like your fiancé, do you? I'm just a concubine. Even if we are concubines, we are still husband and wife. In the future, I will also be your husband. Ning Xuemo choked. Husband? What a strange word. She couldn't apply this word to the man in front of her. Moreover, this person would not become her husband. If there were no accidents, she would run away. Ning Xuemo knew that the person in front of her was too perverted and could retrieve her memories, so she restrained her emotions and stood up. It's getting late. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. How's the wedding dress? Han Shanyu asked from behind her. It's just marrying a concubine. There's no need to prepare a wedding dress. When the time comes, I'll just wear a new dress. Ning Xuemo answered casually. Anyway, she wouldn't be the bride that day. You really didn't prepare anything? Han Shanyue's voice became cold again. There were only 3 days until their wedding day. She had been wandering around outside every day. Did she not prepare anything that the bride's side of the family should prepare for the wedding? Of course she didn't prepare anything. She didn't want to marry him. Ning Xuemo was also afraid that he would be suspicious, so she blushed. This is my first time experiencing it. I don't know what to prepare. Then I'll ask old Zhong to prepare for me tomorrow. Chapter 421. Han Shanyu was speechless. His voice was half cold and half warm. It's my first time too. Then have you prepared the groom's robe? Ning Xuemo asked him back. I don't like red. Han Shanyu slowly sat up straight. You like red? Me? I'm fine with it. But you're just marrying a concubine this time, so it's okay if you don't wear the red groom's robe. You're going to marry a wife in the future, so you have to wear it even if you don't like it. Otherwise, The bride's family won't be happy. Ning Xuemor's tone was serious. Han Shanyu stared at her. You still want to see me marry a wife? What does it have to do with me whether you marry a wife or not? Ning Xuemor rolled her eyes in her heart. You see, you're marrying a concubine, so you'll definitely marry a wife in the future. Your wife is the one who will accompany you for the rest of your life, so you still have to show her respect. For example, for a grand wedding, you have to prepare a phoenix coronet for her, instead of letting the bride do it herself. For example, even if you don't like red, you still have to wear the red groom's robe. You care about these. It's not that I care, but your future wife will care. In the future, when you meet the girl you like and want to marry her, you'll naturally understand. You'll be afraid that she'll be wronged, so you'll give her the best. All right, it's getting late. I really have to go and rest. Ning Xuemor waved her hand at him and turned to leave. You don't have to prepare the wedding dress. When she was almost at the door, he added another sentence. Ning Xuemor's footsteps paused slightly. Okay. It seemed that he finally understood that the wedding dress was something that only the wife would prepare. He didn't let her prepare it because he knew that she didn't need it for a concubine. She didn't know why, but she felt a little uncomfortable. Just as she was about to leave his courtyard, he added, Tomorrow noon is the ceremony for me to become a Taoist master. You can come and watch the ceremony. Ning Xuemor casually uttered an "oh" and walked away. The ceremony for becoming a Taoist master should be very lively and interesting. However, this was also a rare opportunity to escape, so she had to grasp it. Ning Xuemor returned to her room. Just as she was about to take off her clothes and get into bed, she suddenly sensed something and turned around abruptly. Who is it? The window opened by itself, and a person jumped in. In the dark night, that person's figure was extremely familiar. Shiju. He was actually wearing the uniform of a guard in the Marquis's estate, looking shrewd and valiant. Ning Xuemor didn't expect him to come, especially in the middle of the night. Shouldn't he have returned to his Bright King clan? Shijue, why are you here? You're even wearing such a set of clothes. My little temple can't accommodate a great deity like you. You should have sent someone to inform me of your arrival. I would have welcomed you very grandly, Ning Xuemor said half-jokingly. She really had a good impression of this young man and looked at him as if he was her own little brother. Official identities can't enter. Shiju was dressed in black and stood there like a shadow. Ah! It can't be, right? My main door isn't sealed, so you can enter and leave as you wish. It isn't sealed, but there are hidden checkpoints on all the roads leading to Marquis Ning's estate. No official's carriage is allowed to enter your Marquis Ning's estate. It's said that the Taoist master likes peace and quiet, so he refuses any visitors. He's also staying in your estate, so... Shiju explained. His brows furrowed and his fingers secretly clenched. Ning Xuemor. She had neglected this problem. These days, Marquis Ning's estate had been in troubled times. Chapter 422. These days, Marquis Ning's residence had been troubled. The officials all wanted to stay as far away from the residence as possible. Almost no one came to visit her Marquis Ning estate. Therefore, she didn't take it to heart that there were so few people in front of her door these 2 days. Now that she thought about it, it was not normal. She was now the Heavenly Master's concubine, and that super awesome Heavenly Master was living in her mansion. Even the Emperor had to curry favor with this Heavenly Master when he saw him. There was no reason why those officials who were smarter than monkeys would not come to congratulate her. Now that she thought about it, it seemed that the Taoist master had rejected all the troublesome gifts in advance so that no one dared to come. You're not an official of Chang Kong country. If you insist on paying them a visit, would they really dare to stop you? Ning Xuemor raised her hand and poured a cup of tea for him. Come, since you're a guest, drink this cup first. Shiju didn't take the tea from her. He raised his hand and held her hand. Under the candlelight, he looked at her with a burning gaze. Xuemor, come with me. The young man's hand was not big enough, but it was very strong. Ning Xuemor's wrist hurt from his grip. She looked at him but her feet did not move. Go. Where to? Anywhere. It's better than waiting here. Do you really want to marry him? Shijue was a man of action. He pulled her out. Ning Shuemore's feet seemed to have grown roots. She did not take back her hand and only asked him, Shijue, where can you bring me to? Does the Bright King residence dare to fall out with Han Shanyu? Shijue choked. This is my personal decision. It has nothing to do with the Bright King residence. Besides, he is just a painter and does not have much power. So what if he is the Taoist master of Chongkong country? He can't send troops to attack the Bright King residence because of this. Even if he attacks the Bright King residence, we may not lose. It is hard to say who will win. I believe that Le Hin Thai is not so stupid. Ning Shuemore sighed. Although Shijue was smart, he was still a 15-year-old child. Shiju, do you think this Han Shanyu is really a loner without any power? Shiju was stunned. Isn't that so? I've sent people to sort out his information. Although his whereabouts are a bit mysterious, he's still a very good person. But every time he appeared, he was alone. He was just an art saint with high martial arts skills. If the vast Sky Empire doesn't stand up for him, he won't be able to contend against the wise King Mana. Ning Shuemore could not help but rub the space between her eyebrows. She patted his hand and said in a serious tone, Shijue, you're going to be Wisdom King's successor in the future. You can't consider things so simply. Shiju looked at her with his eyes wide open. What do you mean? Think about it carefully. This Han Shanyu has been famous for more than 60 years. He always has an endless supply of rare treasures on him. Many of them are rare in this world. If such a fat sheep does not have a hidden power by his side, would those big families and clans allow him to live so freely? Shiju, that was true. In fact, whether it was a country or a gang, they needed a lot of money to maintain their normal operations. You can never have too much money. This money might not be earned openly. There were also some under-the-table operations. For example, killing people for their money, or killing the rich to help the poor. And this Mr. Han was precisely such a fat sheep. Ning Shuemore continued, no matter how strong a person is, he can't contend against a country or a gang. Chapter 423. If he was a general without an army, even if he had the ability to reach the heavens, there would be a time when he would take a nap. Those forces in the open and in the dark would have made their move long ago. How could he have survived until now? Shiju said, you mean, he really has a force by his side. But how come no one has ever seen it before? Ning Shuemore nodded. There must be, and it must be an extremely powerful force. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to be so secretive and not leave any traces. I believe that there were many gangs that made their move, but they were all easily dealt with by his secret forces. That's why everyone is afraid. They have to be respectful to him. Shiju slightly clenched his fist. Those elders in the Bright King Manor had also said that before. Ning Shuemore continued to analyze. Also, this person has a natural noble temperament. One look and you can tell that he has been in a high position for a long time. It's not something that a so-called art saint or fortune teller can have. In her previous life, she had seen many awesome artists. They were also arrogant, but that was the arrogance of cultured people. But not like Han Shanyu. Ning Shuemore felt that even George W. Bush did not have this kind of aura. This kind of aura was not faked, but naturally brought out. This kind of noble aura that came out of his bones was scary. The forces behind this kind of person were usually not small. In her previous life, she had seen something similar on a triad boss who had been passed down for 3 generations and had absolute influence all over the world. But compared to this Han Shanyue's aura, the difference was too great. This person's status was definitely not low. Shiju was stunned for a moment. Been in a high position for a long time? Then who is his other identity? I have seen many of the main leaders of the major forces on this continent and have also heard of many, but I have never heard of anyone like him. Ning Shuemore softly spat out 3 words. What about Di Zun? Shiju was stunned for a moment, then shook his head. It's definitely not him. What kind of status does Di Zun have? Why would he lower himself to be a small heavenly master in Chongkong country? With this status, I don't even deserve to carry his shoes. She glanced at Ning Shuamore again. She wanted to say something, but hesitated. Ning Shuamore had a hunch that he wouldn't say anything nice, but she still needed to listen to him so that she could make a better judgment. So, she glared at him and said, "If you want to say something, just say it. You're not a man if you're hemming and hawing." Shi Ju was provoked by her words of not being a man and immediately said the rest of what he wanted to say. Di Zun's status is not ordinary. Furthermore, he had long since severed his emotions and desires. No, he was emotionless and desireless. He would not have any real interactions with any woman. Even when he went out on patrol, the girls beside the sedan only followed him out. He didn't speak more than 3 sentences to them in a year. Do you know who those girls are? Ning Shuamore had never heard of this before. She shook her head slightly. What's his identity? At most, they are geniuses from various countries. Shi Ju shook his head and sighed. It's not that simple. Those girls were all psychokinesis geniuses. There was no doubt about that. Among them, there were a few who had very noble statuses. For example, there was the miss of the Nangong family and the daughter of the sect leader of Sky Music School. There were also some in my Bright King residence. She was my half-sister, and there was even a princess from the royal family. Ning Shuamore blinked her eyes. So there were so many sects and countries that sent spies to his side. This is also good. Since you sects have sent people to his side, it will be more convenient for you to handle matters in the future. Chapter 424. Shi Ju's face darkened. What spy? The most important rule for anyone who works for the ancestor is to sever all ties with their own sect or country. During this period, they are not allowed to have any contact with their family. Violators will be immediately expelled from the Sun Moon sect. So abnormal? Severing ties with family is even stricter than becoming a monk. There's actually such an abnormal rule. I'm afraid these girls are not willing, right? Shi Ju smiled bitterly. You're wrong. They are very willing. For such a limited number of places, they're fighting to the death. Those who can go are all top figures. Running for this position is 100 times more difficult than becoming a disciple of the Sun Moon sect. These girls will be changed every 3 years. So it's only 3 years of work. After 3 years, they can go back to their families. Of course, after 3 years, even if they don't want to, they have to come back. Because this is the ancestors' iron rule. No one can violate it. That's not bad. However, since they've been working for the ancestor for such a long time, they should have a lot of contact with him, right? They should also know a lot about the Sun Moon sect. Ning Shuamore guessed. Even the most mysterious sect, if one stayed in the core group for 3 years, they would more or less understand it. Shi Ju shook his head. When they came back, they didn't mention anything about the Sun Moon sect. It seems that they have forgotten everything about the ancestor. Once, someone wanted to know more about the ancestor from their mouths and specially sent a high-level hypnotist to hypnotize them. However, it was useless. They only vaguely remember that they were working for the ancestor, but they forgot what the ancestor looked like. Perhaps they have never seen him before. Forgotten? Could it be that their memories were erased? Or perhaps they were given some kind of forgetful drug? Ning Shuamore's heart moved. She blurted out, "Do you think the ancestor and them had something?" The ancestor was afraid that it would affect his image, so he made them lose their memories. Shi Ju's face darkened. He said impolitely, "What kind of mess is your head full of? The ancestor wouldn't be so tasteless. Those girls are called saintesses. When they go, they are virgins. When they come back, they are still virgins. They can still marry. Moreover, they are all outstanding talents." Okay, she was thinking the wrong way. It seemed like the ancestor just didn't want these women to spread the news about the Sun Moon sect. He had no other intentions. She paused and suddenly looked up at Shi Ju. "Why are you suddenly talking about them? What does that have to do with me?" Shi Ju coughed and said, "I just want to prove that the ancestor is not this Han Shan Yu. Just think about it, even the most inconspicuous maids around the ancestor are all geniuses with noble statuses. If he wanted a concubine, the conditions would be even higher. He was afraid that if he let out the slightest bit of news, There would be a large number of people crying and begging to marry him. Why would he need to go to such great lengths to scheme against you? Ning Xuemore, she cast a sidelong glance at him. Do you mean that I'm not worth his scheming? He gave me a concubine and I still have to be grateful to him? Shi Ju had a headache. I'm talking about Di Zun. Di Zun wouldn't be so bored. As for Han Shanyu, it was hard to say. The ancestor was the guardian of this continent. How could he have the time to care about the mortal world? Not to mention using such despicable methods to scheme against you and make you a concubine. Moreover, I also received accurate news that the ancestor is still a guest in Aquamarine. It is impossible for him to come here. Therefore, this Han Shanyu is definitely not him. Chapter 425. It's not him? Ning Xuemore pondered for a while. It really didn't seem to be him. Although the two of them had similar temperaments, Di Zun seemed to be colder. He was the kind that carried a strong chill even in the summer. Han Shanyue's was not as serious. More importantly, Di Zun's eyes were black while Han Shanyue's were dark blue. He couldn't be like the modern people and wear cosmetic contact lenses, right? Then what kind of power was behind Han Shanyu? It was so secretive and so strong. It seemed like it was not inferior to the top sects. Why did he deliberately want to marry her as a concubine? She really couldn't think of anything that could make him covet her. She was pondering when Shijue suddenly grabbed her hand. Shijue's voice was a little anxious. Don't think about these useless things now. Take advantage of the night and leave with me. Leave with him? Leaving with him would only implicate him. He was only the wise king's heir, not the wise king. He had a fiery heart, but he didn't have strong wings to protect her. If she really left with him, not only would she implicate him and cause him to lose his position as the wise king's heir, she would also be hunted down by both the wise king residents and Chang Kong country. The far-sighted king's people would never allow their crown prince to get together with a jinx with a notorious reputation. By then, she would face more pressure and be in more danger. Shijue, how did you get rid of the guards that were following you? Ning Xuemore suddenly asked. Shijue didn't hesitate. Getting rid of them wasn't too difficult. I used the excuse of going to the toilet. Suddenly, he realized something and frowned. Xuemore, why are you asking this? Ning Xuemore sighed. You came to find me without telling the wise king residents, right? This. Shijue was speechless for a moment. He paused for a moment before saying, why would I need their permission to do anything? They are just guards. But they represent your father's generation and are following your father's orders. I'm sorry, Shijue, I can't implicate you. I can't leave with you. Ning Xuemore broke free from Shijue's hand and stepped back to sit on the chair. Shijue was anxious. What do you mean by implicating me? I'm not afraid of being implicated. Follow me. Do you really want to marry that pervert? He took a step forward and pulled her again. Whoosh. A streak of faint red flew in from outside the door, brushing past Shiju's fingertips and hitting the teacup on the table. With a loud bang, the teacup that Ning Xuemore had brought to Shijue was smashed into pieces. Shijue was taken aback. He subconsciously glanced over and found that the thing that broke the teacup was actually a soft leaf. It was stuck on the table like a trembling butterfly. Who trespassed into Miss Ning's residence? Shiju's duty as a guard was taken over and he forgot his identity for a moment. With a flash of his figure, he had already passed through the door. Ning Xuemore's expression changed, and she hurriedly followed him out. There was a maple tree in the corner of her yard. It was already autumn. The maple leaves were red, as bright as fire. On one of the thin branches of the maple tree sat a man in a moonlight robe. His hair was like ink satin and his clothes were like fine clouds. In his hand was a white jade flute. The wind blew his black hair and white robe, making the brilliant maple tree dim in an instant. It was as if the moonlight in the sky only flowed for him. Han Shanyu. When Shijue saw him, his expression changed slightly. Mr. Han, what are you doing here in Miss Ning's room so late at night? Chapter 426. Han Shanyu glanced at him and ignored him. His eyes fell on Ning Xuemore. Come here. Ning Xuemore frowned and did not move. Mr. Han, Your courtyard is next door. You seem to have come to the wrong place. Han Shanyu looked at her with a smile. You are my future concubine. Other men can enter your room, but I can't. There was a hint of teasing in this sentence, but there was also a hint of coldness. Ning Xuemo's heart sank. Although Han Shanyu did not show much expression, she still felt that this guy was angry. This person did not make a move, but once he made a move, it would be thunderous. Then Shijue. She immediately stood in front of Shiju and looked up at Han Shanyu who was sitting there. He is my guard, not some other man. Han Shanyu looked at her standing in front of Shijue like an old hen protecting her chicks. His eyes darkened, but his words were calm. Guard? Now he is. Now he is not. Ning Xuemo took a breath and was about to say something. Shijue, who was behind her, said proudly, as long as Xuemo agrees, I can also be her guard now. Han Shanyue's eyes were deep and unfathomable. He said lightly, you are willing to be her guard. I can let you stay and be her guard forever. The jade flute in his hand spun slowly, and there were strands of white light condensing at the tip of the flute. Ning Xuemo's face changed. She knew Han Shanyue's ability. Even 100 Shijue would not be his opponent. His words were not good. Once he had the intention to kill Shijue, Shijue would not be able to walk out of this courtyard. In a panic, she rushed towards Han Shanyu. She jumped onto the branch under his feet and tried to grab his jade flute. We are just friends, nothing else. Her position was extremely tricky, and it blocked all the possible directions for Han Shanyu to attack Shijue. It made him unable to make a move. Han Shanyue's eyes flashed, and he raised his arm. Ning Xuemo did not manage to grab his jade flute, but instead grabbed the ribbon around his waist. It was also at this moment that the soft branch under his feet broke with a crack because of the extra person's weight. His and her body suddenly sank down. Almost reflexively, Ning Xuemo hugged his waist. Han Shanyu, on the other hand, grabbed her with his left arm, and with a slight turn of his body, he had already moved to another branch. The faint fragrance was intoxicating like the fragrance of flowers. By the time Ning Xuemo reacted, she realized that not only was she hugging his waist, but her head was also buried in his chest. She could even hear the steady heartbeat in his chest. She subconsciously raised her head and looked into a pair of eyes that were as deep as the sea. He lowered his eyes to look at her, and a smile flashed across his lips. I asked you to come over just now, but you didn't. Now you're throwing yourself into my arms. Throw myself into your arms. Throw myself into your arms. Ning Xuemo regained her senses and hurriedly let go of his waist, wanting to retreat to another branch. But Han Shanyue's arm tightened, and she could not help but fall back onto his chest. Her nose hit his chest, and it was sore and painful. She angrily raised her head and was about to reprimand him. Han Shanyue's eyes deepened, and he spoke again, It's rare for you to be so passionate. Suddenly, he lowered his head, and a faint scent similar to that of sandalwood suddenly approached her. In front of Ning Xuemo's wide-open eyes, he kissed her slightly parted red lips. Chapter 427. Ning Xuemo's body froze as if she was struck by lightning. He actually took the initiative to kiss her. Wasn't he a clean freak? Didn't he slap people onto the street after being kissed? What was wrong with him today? Was there water in his brain? Although his kiss was as light as a feather, Ning Xuemo was still angry when she reacted. In a fit of anger, she raised her hand and slapped his handsome face. Damn it! She wanted to take revenge for being slapped onto the street. Her hand was fast, but her palm was intercepted by his hand before it could reach him. With just a turn, her body was once again enveloped in his embrace. Her wrist was also grasped by his hand, and he gently tugged it. She couldn't help but bump into him again. This time, she bumped right into his face. Her lips coincidentally landed on his lips. Damn it! Why was there such a melodramatic situation today? Ning Xuemo wanted to raise her head, but his hand was fixed at the back of her head. Her lips were still on his and she couldn't move. You! Ning Xuemo shouted angrily. When she opened her mouth, his lips almost slipped into her mouth. She quickly closed her mouth and stared at him with her eyes wide open. He also looked at her. Their lips were connected, but their eyes were staring at each other like fighting cocks. This position was indescribably strange. Ning Xuemore gritted her teeth and snorted, "Bastard, let go of me." She couldn't speak clearly. Han Shanyue's hand loosened slightly. Finally, their lips separated. The distance between them was really too close. Ning Xuemore's charming face finally turned red. Han Shanyue's eyes were fixed on her face. Her every expression didn't escape his eyes. He looked at her calmly and touched her face with his fingers. "Your face is red." "Ian, what did you say just now?" Ning Xuemore tried her best to lean back and put some distance between them. "Bastard, let go of me." "All right." Han Shanyu readily agreed and suddenly let go. At this time, the two of them were still standing on the weak maple branch. When he suddenly let go, Ning Xuemore did not control her body well and fell straight down. Fortunately, the tree wasn't very tall, and she managed to adjust her body mid-air, so she didn't fall. She only staggered a few steps before she steadied herself. After she stood still, she was furious. She glared at Piao Piao, who was standing on the tree. She couldn't help but curse, Are you crazy?" Han Shanyu looked down at her and said lazily, "I heard that someone called me a pervert." Ning Xuemore, how much did he hear about her conversation with Shijue? When she thought of Shijue, she subconsciously looked around, but the courtyard was already empty. Where was Shijue? Hey, where's Shijue? Left. When did he leave? There's no need to look for him. He left. Han Shanyu said lazily from the tree. Ning Xuemore sighed in relief. If Shijue stayed here, it would only make the situation worse. It was good that he left in time. Otherwise, Han Shanyu wouldn't be in a good mood and kill him. In order to prevent Han Shanyu from thinking about what happened today, Ning Xuemore opened her mouth to explain, "There's really nothing between him and me. I only see him as my younger brother. If there's anything between you and him, do you think he can just leave like that?" Han Shanyu replied carelessly. His tone was so arrogant that it made people want to beat him up. Chapter 428. Ning Xuemore raised her head and looked at him. Suddenly, her lips curled into a smile. "Your pants are torn." Han Shanyu froze. From where Ning Xuemore was standing, she could see his pants under his robe. Was it really torn? Why didn't he feel anything? He subconsciously wanted to lift up his robe to take a look, but he seemed to have thought of something and stopped. His fingers held the jade flute and his legs straightened. His body was stiff for a moment. Ning Xuemore rarely saw his embarrassed appearance. Her heart that had been depressed for a long time felt a little better. She smiled and no longer paid attention to him. She turned around and entered the house. After she entered the house, she looked out of the window again. Han Shanyue's shadow had disappeared from the big tree. He must have gone back to his courtyard to check his pants. She couldn't help but smile. But halfway through, her smile disappeared and she sighed. Although her escape plan was well planned, she was afraid that it would not be so easy to meet Han Shanyu. She gently touched her lips and thought of the short kiss that she had with him. Her fingers slowly clenched. This was actually her first kiss with a grown man. How could she lose her first kiss just like that? Damn it. She had never tasted the kind of feeling described in novels when two lovers kissed. Her heart raced like thunder, and the feeling of heavenly thunder stirring up the earth fire. It was already late at night. There were very few people on the street. Shijue flew on the street. His heart was burning like a fire. The image of Han Shanyu hugging Ning Xuemore and kissing her appeared in front of his eyes. At that time, he heard the sound of his heart shattering. He wanted to rush over regardless of anything, but he didn't expect that the person who was hugging the beauty with one hand and the other hand just waved at him casually. It was as if his body was fixed in place and he couldn't move at all. He finally understood that his martial arts was like an ant trying to shake a big tree. He couldn't move at all. He hadn't even made a move and he had already been defeated. He also finally understood that with Han Shanyu in front of him, it was no doubt a fool's dream to take Ning Xuemore away. And he didn't want to see the scene of Han Shanyu and Ning Xuemore being intimate on the big tree. So when he regained his freedom, he turned around and left without saying a word. As her personal shadow guard, He couldn't save her from the devil's side. Shiju only felt an unprecedented defeat. As he ran, he saw an unfinished tavern. Without saying a word, he barged in and slapped the counter in front of the tavern owner who was about to fall asleep. With a loud bang, the owner of the tavern almost jumped up in shock. "Shopkeeper, give me 10 catties of wine and 2 catties of beef," Shiju ordered loudly. He urgently needed to use wine to douse the fire in his heart. Just as he was about to find a table, he turned his head and saw a person sitting at a table in the corner. He was slightly stunned. Ji Yunhuang. Why was the vast Sky Empire's crown prince here? There were so many tables and benches in the tavern, but he didn't sit. Instead, he chose to sit in the most remote corner. At this moment, Ji Yunhuang should be half drunk. Even though Shiju had made such a big commotion, he didn't even look up and continued to drink cup after cup of wine. There were so many dishes in front of him, but he didn't even touch them. Instead, he drank 3 or 4 jugs of wine. Ji Yunhuang was indeed a member of the imperial family. He was clearly a little drunk, but when he drank, his posture was still elegant and noble. Not knowing why, Shiju remembered what Ning Shuamore said about Han Shanue's noble aura that was even more noble than the imperial family. His heart felt even more uncomfortable. Chapter 429. It was rumored that this crown prince was obsessed with cleanliness and never ate outside food. Why was he drinking so happily in this shabby tavern today? He walked over with large strides. Drinking alone in the middle of the night is boring. Why don't I drink with you? Do you mind if we share a table? As he asked, he had already sat down opposite Ji Yunshu. Ji Yunhuang raised his head to look at him. Looking at him from such a close distance, he really did drink too much. His eyes were already red from drinking and he actually did not recognize Shijue, the wise king's heir. He only raised his hand and said, "Please," before downing the wine in one gulp. It seemed that he really only needed a drinking buddy and did not care who was sitting opposite him. If it was in the past, when Shijue met the drunk Ji Yunhuang, he would definitely try to dig out some secrets of the vast Sky Empire. However, he was not in the mood now and only wanted to drink. He filled his own cup and said, "Please," before downing the cup. This wine was ordinary, inferior, and spicy. Once the cup went down his throat, the heat rolled down his esophagus and rushed into his empty stomach, making him feel a little hot. Shijue had lived a life of luxury since young. After drinking this kind of wine, he could not help but frown. He looked at Ji Yunhuang and saw that he was drinking cup after cup happily, as if he was not drinking strong wine but sweet spring water. After drinking a few cups, he even praised, "Good wine." This was considered good wine? Shijue was speechless. He did not want to drink this kind of inferior wine. Ji Yunhuang raised his head to look at him and laughed. "Little brother, you don't even dare to drink this wine. Are you still a man? If you don't want to drink, then leave." A youth of Shijue's age could not stand being provoked. He immediately sneered. "Why wouldn't I dare to drink? I think this wine cup is too small. Drinking is not refreshing. Shopkeeper, change to a bigger bowl. We'll use a bigger bowl." These two men were not people to be trifled with, so the shopkeeper did not dare to persuade them and changed their bowls with a bitter face. The two of them drank from one bowl to the other. When they drank too much, even the best wine would taste like plain water in their mouths. Of course, no matter how bad the wine was, it didn't taste that bad. After drinking more than 10 bowls of wine, Shijue's eyes were already a little dizzy. In his drunken eyes, Ning Shuamore's figure kept swaying in front of his eyes. "Shuamore," he murmured. He felt as if his heart was being twisted. It was the first time the youth tasted love, and he encountered such a messy situation that he didn't know what to do. The person opposite him suddenly grabbed his collar and said, "You're not allowed. You're not allowed to say her name." Shiju was also unhappy and threw a punch over. "I like to call you that. You, don't mind me." Bang. He didn't know where he had hit, but the man finally let go of his collar and threw a punch at him. Just like that, the two of them started fighting. Both of them were drunk, so they fought without any rhyme or reason. It was like a fight between drunkards on the street. If you punch me a few times, I'll return the favor with a few kicks. If my hair is messy and my clothes are loose, I'll give you a black eye and kick you until you roll on the ground." The tables, chairs, and stools in the tavern fell one after another, and the sound of shattering could be heard. The tavern owner complained incessantly. The two drunkards' punches were so fierce that an ordinary person like him couldn't even get a foot in. Chapter 430. The two drunkards' fists were so fierce that an ordinary person like him couldn't even get close to them. After a moment of hesitation, a big bowl flew over and covered his head with soup and water. The innkeeper finally got angry and ran out to report this to the authorities. These few days, the security in the capital was extremely tight and the soldiers patrolling at night were also very dense. Thus, the innkeeper quickly found a team. When the leader heard that there was a fight, he immediately led a team of soldiers to arrest them. The soldiers were like wolves and tigers as they swarmed in. The leader was about to shout and show off, but the moment he saw the face of one of them, he knelt down with a thud. "Your Highness the Crown Prince." When the official knelt down, the other soldiers naturally knelt down as well. The innkeeper was also dumbfounded. The person in front of him who was beaten black and blue and whose breath reeked of alcohol was actually the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince who was untainted by the mortal world. This was too much of a challenge to his heart. However, this matter wasn't over yet. After the leader kowtowed to Ji Yunhuang, he immediately got up and ordered his men to arrest Shi Ju. This person actually dared to beat up the Crown Prince. He was really tired of living. However, before their soldiers could surround them, 4 guards dressed in black with embroidered clouds rushed in and knelt down in front of Shi Ju. "Your Highness the Crown Prince." Crown Prince. Everyone was shocked. The leader of the guards waved a jade tablet in his hand. "We are from the Wise King Manor and this is our Crown Prince. Whoever dares to be rude to him will be the enemy of the entire Wise King Manor." Whether it was the Crown Prince of Chong Kong Country or the Crown Prince of Wise King Manor, they were not people that ordinary people could provoke. The two of them drank too much and fought. Moreover, their injuries were similar. The people on both sides looked at each other for a moment and admitted that they were unlucky. They supported their masters and left. Only the innkeeper was left standing in front of a pile of debris. He was speechless. He originally had a small fortune, but the fight between these two noble young masters had destroyed more than half of his fortune. If these two were taken away, who would compensate for his loss? The innkeeper hugged his head and squatted down, unable to cry even if he wanted to. A pair of feet appeared in front of him and a banknote floated down and landed at his feet. "This 1,000 taels of silver is to compensate for your loss." The tavern owner raised his head in surprise, but all he saw was a green figure drifting away. That person looked like he was strolling leisurely, but in a flash, he disappeared into the street. The tavern owner's jaw dropped. Did he see a ghost? He picked up the banknotes on the ground and looked at them carefully. The banknotes were real. He could withdraw cash from any bank. 1,000 taels of silver was enough to compensate for his losses. Who was that person? Which young master did he represent? The tavern owner was confused, but he couldn't care less. "My lord, we've already pressured the far-sighted king's residence. The far-sighted king's crown prince has already been taken away by the far-sighted king's residence. He won't be back anytime soon." However, this subordinate saw His Highness the Crown Prince. He was actually drinking in a small tavern, and he was dead drunk. A subordinate's report came out of the sound transmission talisman. Han Shanyu was sitting on a chair. There was a painting on the table in front of him. The ink on the painting was still wet. It was obvious that it had just been completed. There was a woman in the painting. Her eyebrows were lively, and her red dress was like fire. She danced gracefully and played the pipa as if she was flying. She had both spirit and form. It was as if she could walk out of the painting and dance again if one blew on her. Chapter 431. The voice in the directed audio spell finally finished its report. Han Shanyu nodded and turned off the spell. He looked at the completed painting on the table again. His finger gently brushed the eyebrows of the woman in the painting, and his lips curled up. A smile flashed across his face. At dawn, Ning Xuemore woke up. Just as she was about to tidy up, she heard music coming from outside. The music sounded like Buddhist music, with a calming effect. Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat when she heard it. She didn't know why, but ever since she was young, she couldn't listen to Buddhist music. Other people could calm down when they listened to Buddhist music, but she was furious when she heard it. So when she listened to light music at home, she never listened to Buddhist music. Now that she heard it again, the anger in her heart wanted to come out again. She took a deep breath and suppressed her emotions. She calmed herself down and thought. What was going on? Was there someone performing a ritual on this street? Ning Xuemo opened the door and came out. She was shocked when she walked out of her courtyard. Old Zhong was waiting outside with a group of newly dressed guards. All of them were in high spirits and their faces were glowing. What was going on? Did something good happen to them? Ning Xuemo was about to speak, but old Zhong stepped forward. Master, the Taoist master invites you over. Wasn't he going to attend the ceremony? Why did he ask her to go over? Ning Xuemo suddenly had a bad feeling, but she couldn't refuse. She had to go to Han Shanyue's courtyard. After seeing Han Shanyu, she knew his purpose. He actually asked her to go with him to the Taoist master's residence. He said he was going there to take a bath and change his clothes, and wanted her to serve him. Ning Xuemo was naturally unwilling. She found an excuse to refuse. Taoist master, you must have a lot of maids serving you. You don't need me. But you are the only concubine. Han Shanyue's words made her choke. Damn it. A concubine was not a maid. How could she serve him when he bathed and changed his clothes? Heavenly Master, I'm not your concubine yet. Can I stay by your side after we get married? No. But if I follow you now, people will criticize me. More importantly, it would delay her escape plan. Do you think you don't have enough criticism? I don't need this one. Han Shanyu was too lazy to argue with her, so he simply pulled her hand and walked away. Ning Xuemo was speechless. She could not continue to push and pull with him here, so as not to provoke criticism. Moreover, she couldn't break free from his grip. Didn't this guy always have misophobia and disdain to have any physical contact with her? Why was he suddenly holding her hand this time? I haven't washed my hands. Ning Xuemo wanted him to let go. Han Shanyue's fingers tightened slightly, but he had no intention of letting her go. He only replied, go to the Celestial Master's residence to wash. Don't you dislike physical contact with people? She refused to give up. You'll have to get used to it sooner or later, Han Shanyu replied casually. Ning Xuemo. Her heart skipped a beat. Did he mean that he would often have physical contact with her in the future? That's right. The day after tomorrow was their wedding day. If that day really came, would he really want to consummate their marriage? Ning Xuemo secretly shuddered. Her desire to escape became even stronger. Although her soul was that of an adult, this little body was actually that of a young girl who was not even 14 years old. Her development was not complete yet. If they consummated their marriage, it would be very painful. Chapter 432. She would not let him have the chance to ravage an underage girl. If she could not escape today, then she would escape tomorrow. Anyway, she still had time. Karin was the kind of guy that would play the gong 9 times out of 10. It would go wherever there was a commotion. It came out of nowhere and jumped into Ning Xuemo's arms. Master, I want to go too. Before its little claws could touch Ning Xuemo's clothes, it was slapped away by Han Shanyu. Go take a bath. Karin rolled on the ground, then jumped up and looked at Han Shanyu angrily. Its body was already clean enough. Why did he want it to take a bath? Han Shanyu looked at it coldly. Karin seemed to shiver, and its blue fur stood up. It tucked its tail and ran to take a bath. Ning Xuemo was a little curious. Did her Karin suffer under Han Shanyue's hands? Why was it like a mouse seeing a cat when it saw him? Originally, Karin liked to stick to her. At night, when it was sleeping, it would turn into a cat and lie by her feet. But ever since Master Han Shanyu came to her mansion, Karin did not dare to stay by her side. At night, it would also obediently sleep in its own nest. These past few days, Ning Shuamore had been preoccupied with a lot of things, so she didn't notice the little Chiline's mood. Now, she had doubts in her heart. She looked at Han Shanyu. Why is it so afraid of you? Did you teach it a lesson? Han Shanyu took large strides forward and did not answer her question. He only lightly said, look at what you've taught a divine beast to look like. A cat. Ning Shuamore was stunned. His tone sounded like he was blaming her for teaching Karine the wrong things. TSK, Karine was hers. What did it have to do with him what she taught it? It is yours, and you are mine. Naturally, it is also mine. In the future, I will teach Little Apple. Han Shanyu seemed to have seen through her thoughts. Ning Shuamore smiled and said nothing more. She was going to take Karine with her. Even if he wanted to discipline him, there was no way he was going to do so. The group of people went out in a mighty manner. Ning Shuamore was even more surprised when she arrived outside the door. There was already a large group of people outside. There were imperial guards in bright armor, Daoist children in green Daoist robes, and young girls in linen robes with various magical artifacts in their hands. Line after line, they stood there respectfully. In the middle of them, there was a luxurious carriage pulled by 8 horses. At a glance, he actually couldn't see the end of the procession. On both sides of the procession, there were musicians playing faintly discernible classical tunes. At this moment, the Crown Prince, Ji Yunhuang, and various other officials were standing at the front of the procession. Seeing Han Shanyu and Ning Shuamore coming out hand in hand, Ji Yunhuang's eyes flashed with a touch of sadness. However, he immediately went forward and bowed to Han Shanyu with a smile. He said that he was under the orders of the Emperor to invite the Heavenly Master back to the Heavenly Master residence to take a bath and change clothes before going to the Heaven Altar to worship the heavens. He said it completely in classical official language. Ning Shuamore understood the general situation. Only now did she know that there were many ceremonies for the Heavenly Master to ascend the throne. It seemed that Chang Kong country had put in a lot of effort to keep this great master. They did not hesitate to waste manpower and money to create such a big scene. She had not seen Ji Yunhuang for nearly 10 days. At this moment, he seemed to have lost some weight. There were faint dark circles under his eyes. It was obvious that he did not sleep well these days. In public, Ning Shuamore did not want to hold hands with this great master, especially in front of Ji Yunhuang. Chapter 433. In public, Ning Shuamore did not want to hold hands with this great master, especially in front of Ji Yunhuang. She subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand, but Han Shanyue's grip on her fingers tightened. His fingers looked delicate, but they were extremely strong. Ning Shuamore was unable to break free from his grip. Instead, her fingers started to hurt from his grip. Ning Shuamore naturally did not want to pull with him here, so she could only let him hold her hand with a stiff face. After Ji Yunhuang finished his speech, he led the officials to make way for them. Han Shanyu nodded slightly and held Ning Shuamore's hand as they walked towards the carriage. The road leading to the carriage was covered with a snow-white carpet, with officials standing on both sides. Ning Shuamore followed Han Shanyu as they walked on the carpet. It felt like a celebrity walking on a red carpet, except there were flashing lights. This was not an ordinary luxurious scene. Although Ning Shuamore was used to seeing the world, at this moment, she still felt a little nervous. She knew that Lehin Thai valued this new great master very much, but she did not expect it to be to this extent. Looking at this scene, it was almost comparable to the Emperor's personal entourage. It was not much inferior to the Emperor's travel. She glanced at Han Shanyu who was beside her. His face was very calm, as if he was used to this kind of extravagance and did not care at all. Was it because he practiced martial arts and did not express his emotions, or was he already used to this kind of extravagance? The first one meant that he was very scheming, the second one meant that his identity was very high. A thought suddenly appeared in her mind. This Han Shanyu could not be the Emperor's incarnation, right? When this thought appeared, it made her tremble. Are you scared? Han Shanyu seemed to have sensed her inner thoughts and lightly turned his head to ask her a question. Ning Shuamore's heart skipped a beat, but she smiled, a little. I haven't seen much of the world. You will get used to it in the future. Ning Shuamore smiled and probed him. Heavenly teacher, You seem to be very calm. Could it be that you're already used to it? What do you think? Han Shanyu kicked the ball back. Lord Heavenly Master is unfathomable. How can mere mortals like us guess at will? You'll have plenty of time in the future. Just follow me and slowly guess. Damn it. This fellow's words were simply watertight. She was led by Han Shanyu to the front of the carriage. The style of this carriage could only be described with one word: low-key luxury. Black and white were the main colors of the carriage. The snow-white jade carriage was inlaid with obsidian with a faint luster. The shaft of the carriage was dark gold and emitted a faint fragrance. It was like a piece of jade. The sound of gold and the sound of jade echoed. Phoebe Jeannan. No, this material seemed to be much harder than Phoebe Jeannan. Her voice was also much nicer. This type of wood could be said to be worth an inch of gold. Normally, it would be very extravagant to make a small ornament, but who would have thought that it would be used to make a carriage shaft? Sure enough, it was the royal family's generosity. It was extraordinary. The old emperor really spent a lot of money to keep people here. Ning Xuemore suddenly felt that the 100,000 taels of gold she proposed to the old emperor was too little. She was about to board the carriage under everyone's gaze when a voice sounded from behind. "Master, I'm coming." Karine was like a blue light, rushing from behind like a whirlwind. Before it could reach her, it suddenly jumped and threw itself into Ning Xuemore's arms. It missed its master's embrace so much. Woo-woo. Chapter 434. Bang! Karine was once again flung away by Han Shuo's sleeves. This time, it fell further and harder. Luckily, it was a carpet. Although Karine had the appearance of a blue cat, it was still a Karine with thick skin and flesh, so it was not afraid of falling. Therefore, it involuntarily rolled a few times on the carpet and suddenly jumped up. It opened its eyes wide and stared at Han Shanyu angrily. "You. What are you doing now? I have already showered. Return to your original form and follow behind." Han Shanyu glanced at it coldly. Why does a Karine always turn into a cat? Karine was speechless. It just thought that it was convenient. Only when it turned into a blue cat would its master be willing to carry it. It looked at Ning Xuemore with grievance, hoping that she would speak up for it. Although Ning Xuemore was unhappy with Han Shanyue's words, she was moved when she saw Karine's appearance. Recently, Karine had indeed turned into a cat for a longer period of time than when it returned to its original form. Originally, it was to hide its identity so that it would not bring her unnecessary trouble. But later, this Karine seemed to be addicted to turning into a cat. It used its cat body every day, even when it was sleeping at night. The mythical beast Karine seemed to show signs of turning into a cat. Its personality was too cute, so she unknowingly kept it as a pet. She was indeed spoiling it a little, therefore, she only nodded at Karine, indicating that she agreed with Han Shanyue's words. Karine had no one to rely on, so it was dejected and could only turn into a Karine again. It was also angry and did not want to follow behind the carriage, so it ran to the front of the carriage and attracted the exclamations of the people on both sides. Ning Xuemore followed Han Shanyu into the carriage. The interior of the carriage was naturally decorated beautifully, and the design was exquisite and comfortable. This kind of luxury had a touch of antiquity. "Can you let go of my hand now?" Ning Xuemore felt that her left hand was about to be broken. Han Shanyu seemed to have just realized this. He let go of her and sat down on a brocade couch. Although the carriage wasn't small, Ning Xuemore still felt pressured to be alone in the carriage with this great god. Her eyes scanned the interior of the carriage. After she finished looking, she sighed in admiration. The person who designed this carriage is also an expert in layout. His vision is great. This carriage design is really not bad. Many thanks. Han Shanyu spat out 2 words. Heh. Ning Xuemore raised her head and looked at him. "Did you design this carriage yourself? What do you think?" Han Shanyue's gaze fell on her face again. This person was an all-rounder. Not only was he the art sage, he was also the music sage. Now, it seemed that he was also an expert in interior design. His martial arts were also very high. Was this person even human? Other people could spend decades or even their entire lives to reach his level of achievement, but it seemed like there was nothing he couldn't do. How old are you? Ning Xuemore couldn't help but ask. She didn't know if it was because she had been getting closer to him recently, or because her eyesight had improved from training, but she could now clearly see his facial features. Ning Xuemore thought for a long time about his facial features, but she could only think of one word: impeccable. His facial features were the most perfect. With such perfect facial features combined together, it made his face even more soul-stirring. Normally, if a man was too beautiful, he would tend to be more feminine, but this Mr. Han was not. His beauty was not feminine at all. One look and you could tell that he was a pure man. Chapter 435. Ning Xuemore even guessed that if this man was a lesbian, he would be a dominant top and not a submissive bottom. What are you thinking about me now? Han Shanyu did not answer her question. He leaned on the couch and looked at her lazily. Ning Xuemore rubbed her red wrist and did not allow him to fool her. I'm guessing your age. Ah, how old do you think I am? You should be 70 or 80 years old, right? Ning Xuemore asked tentatively. He looked like he was in his 20s, but judging from his temperament, he was definitely not. And he seemed to have been famous for 60 years. His martial arts were so high, he should have learned the youthful art like Yi Qingwan. Han Shanyu looked at her with deep eyes. 70 or 80 years old to you, is it young or old? Of course it's very old. Ning Xuemore blurted out, at this age, you can be my grandfather. Han Shanyu, grandfather? He repeated, then leaned back and said, then you can just call me grandpa from now on. Ning Xuemore, then if she married him, wouldn't it be a grandfather-grandchild relationship? Although she would not marry him, it would be too much of a loss for her to call him grandfather from now on. Master Han, you look younger than a teenager. Calling you grandfather would make you old. I'll call you master from now on. Calling you master suits your style more. Whatever. Han Shanyu closed his eyes slightly. Master, I'm about to marry you, but I still don't know your name. Ning Xuemore wanted to find out more information. Han Shanyu suddenly opened his eyes. His deep blue eyes were abnormally deep as he stared at Ning Xuemore. Ning Xuemore felt her scalp tingle from his stare. What's wrong? Isn't my name Han Shanyu? Isn't Han Shanyu your stage name? Stage name? Han Shanyu seemed to be confused. You're the art sage. Don't most artists have stage names or pen names? Han Shanyu looked at her for a moment, then lay back down and closed his eyes again. He only said one sentence, you think too much. Han Shanyu was indeed not his real name, but it had been a long time since anyone dared to call him by his real name. He himself had almost forgotten it. There was no need for him to tell this little girl his real name. After all, they wouldn't be together for too long. Ning Xuemore did not believe that this was his real name. She always felt that his real name should be more prestigious. This name was suitable for an ordinary art saint, but it didn't match him. Forget it. Since he didn't want to talk about it, she didn't need to ask. She also wanted to have as little interaction with him as possible. This person was extremely dangerous. She had always kept a respectful distance from such people. Thinking of dangerous people, she couldn't help but think of the red-clothed Evildor, Shuer Ilan. That bastard was kicked into the lake by her, and as expected, he didn't die. However, it was strange. Since that fellow had escaped danger, with his vengeful personality, why would he let her go for no reason and not harass her? Even if he didn't dare to kill her because of the oath, he would still take revenge, right? Why didn't he do it? Could it be that he was injured at that time? So he was recuperating these days and didn't have time to harass her. Or maybe he had something important to do, so he let her go for a period of time. Or, Ning Xuemore raised her head and looked at Han Shanyu again. Her gaze was complicated. Or was it because this person was guarding by her side, so he couldn't do anything? Chapter 436. What are you thinking about now? Han Shanyu felt that the little girl in front of him liked to be absent-minded. I'm thinking about the red-clothed Evildor. Ning Xuemore had not regained her senses yet, so she casually replied. Ning Xuemore was originally sitting across from him. Just as Ning Xuemore finished her sentence, her body suddenly tightened. Then, she abruptly leaned forward. Caught off guard, she crashed into his chest with a bang. Her nose bumped into his chest, and it hurt a lot. Hey, you dash! Ning Xuemore was angry. She covered her nose and wanted to jump up. Her wrist suddenly tightened and she could not jump up. She could only lie on his body. She angrily raised her head and said, "What are you doing?" At this moment, their bodies were tightly pressed together. When Ning Xuemore raised her head, her small mouth almost touched his lips. She hurriedly leaned back and moved her face away from his face. However, this position was exceptionally close. They could hear each other's breaths. The unique smell of his body lingered around her nose, making her heart beat wildly. His eyes were like the deep blue sea. Their eyes were glued together. Ning Xuemore had the illusion that she was going to drown in them. She could not move her eyes away for a moment. "Master." Karine seemed to have heard something. It slammed the door open and barged in. When it saw the scenery inside, it immediately covered its eyes with its two small paws and said, "I didn't see anything." It quickly rolled out. When it went out, it did not forget to use its two small paws to help them close the door of the carriage. Although the carriage had some soundproofing, it was not very obvious. Even a little bit of noise could not escape the ears of a martial arts expert. Ji Yunhuang led the civil and military officials to walk at the back of the group. When he saw Karine go in and come out so quickly as if he had seen something that was not suitable for children, he tightened his grip on the reins again. His fingertips faintly turned white. The other civil and military officials were all smart people. They looked at each other and had a tacit understanding. It seemed that this heavenly master Han Shanyu was not completely against women. He had already done it with that little girl so quickly. He did not even let her go in the carriage. Inside the carriage, Ning Xuemore was also speechless by Karine's recklessness. Han Shanyu had already let go of her. She quickly got up and retreated a few steps. She leaned against the back of the carriage and glared at him. "What do you mean by that? You are my concubine. You are not allowed to think about other men in the future." Damn it, when was she thinking about other men? Ning Xuemore was about to retort when she suddenly thought of something and looked at him in surprise. "You're not jealous, are you?" Han Shanyu. He closed his eyes again. "If you want to feel better, you can think of it that way." Ning Xuemore decided to ignore him and didn't want to see his face again. She simply lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked out at the scenery. Both sides of the road had been washed with clean water, and the commoners who came to watch the show were blocked by soldiers stationed at every 3 steps. Countless envious and worshipful gazes landed on the carriage she was in. She glanced behind her, and her gaze met with Ji Yunhuang, who had just raised his head. Ji Yunhuang's face was slightly pale. He pursed his thin lips and turned his eyes away. Ning Xuemore could not help but sigh in her heart. No matter what, she was destined to let down Ji Yunhuang's friendship. The carriage finally arrived at the Heavenly Master's mansion. Ning Xuemore could not help but admire the power of the imperial family. In just a short period of 10 days, they were able to build such a mansion. Chapter 437. Ning Xuemore had heard that this used to be a royal garden. Han Shanyu personally chose this place and renovated it according to his favorite architectural style. Ning Xuemore was not sure what this house looked like before, but looking at the current Taoist master residence, 4 words appeared in her mind: quiet and elegant. Especially the 3 words Taoist master residence, which were extremely simple. Ning Xuemore could not help but look at Han Shanyu. Wasn't this guy the art saint? Art saints were also calligraphers. Why didn't he leave his own calligraphy in front of his residence? Han Shanyu and Ning Xuemore entered the Taoist master residence, while the others were waiting outside. Ning Xuemore felt that this Master Han was not an ordinary pretentious person. It was just taking a bath and changing clothes, which could be done in her Jingyuan residence. Why did he have to go back to the Taoist master residence with great fanfare? It was true that his celestial master mansion was more than twice as big as her Marquis Jingyuan's mansion. The buildings inside the mansion were simple and unadorned, yet they revealed the luxury of a superior. There was even a hot spring. Wait a minute. Weren't hot springs rare in Changkong country? Only the Crown Prince residence had one. How come there was one here? And this one was much bigger than the one in the Crown Prince residence. That one was like a big bathtub, and this one was a small pool. It was a gourd-shaped hot spring pool. When Ning Xuemore saw the hot spring, Han Shanyu had already finished bathing and was wearing a robe. His daoist robe was different from ordinary daoist robes. It was pure white like silver without any dark patterns. The sleeves were wide and the hem dragged on the ground. There were no patterns on the front of the robe either. There was only an ink-black obsidian embedded in the collar, which tightened his collar and gave off an aura of abstinence for no reason. His figure was tall and handsome. His black hair was not tied up and casually draped over his shoulders. As he walked, his hair fluttered along with his robe. There was a row of maple trees on both sides of the hot spring. It was autumn and the maple leaves were like fire. When the wind blew, the fiery red maple leaves fluttered and danced around him. They rose and fell with his footsteps, but not a single leaf fell on his body, as if they were afraid of tarnishing his holiness. Ning Xuemore could not help but hold her breath. No wonder the ancients created a phrase called devastatingly beautiful. This person really had the capital to cause the downfall of a city. It made her heart skip a beat the moment she saw him, even though she didn't like little fresh meaty boys. He sat down on a nearby jade stool and crooked his finger at her. Come here. His lazy posture unexpectedly revealed a bit of charm. Ning Xuemore shot him a glance, but she still calmly walked over. What are you doing? Didn't I ask you to do my hair? Out of nowhere, Han Shanyu pulled out a simple wooden comb and handed it to her. Let me see your handiwork. Ning Xuemore was actually a little embarrassed. She had never combed anyone's hair before. Moreover, she was lazy and disliked trouble. In modern times, she kept her hair short and neat. Usually, when she had to attend social gatherings, her skillful subordinates would help her style her hair. In this era, it was not easy for her to learn how to do 2 or 3 hair buns, and they were all suitable for survival in the wild. She couldn't even do her own hair very well. Now, she was asked to do Master Han Shanyue's hair, especially his hair from the coronation ceremony. She felt a little pressured. Master, it's better if you do it yourself. I can't do it. Ning Xuemore did not take the comb. Han Shanyu looked at her. No need to be modest. Just do it. Chapter 438. He wasn't being modest at all. Ning Xuemore complained in her heart, but he didn't seem to be giving her any room to refuse. Fine, I'll comb it. Ning Xuemore took the comb and stood behind him to comb his hair. His hair was as black as ink and as cool as water. The wooden comb could slide down to the top of his head. It felt good to hold it in her hand. Ning Xuemore touched his hair and thought about her own hair. Damn it, her hair wasn't as good as this man's. She was a nimble worker. She quickly tied up his hair and pinned it with a cold jade hairpin on the table. His hair was done. She took a step back and looked at him. Her expression was a little twisted and she felt a little guilty. Han Shanyu seemed to have noticed something from her expression. Out of nowhere, he pulled out a quaint mirror and casually looked at it. The veins on his forehead throbbed. His hair was indeed combed into a bun, but the bun was a little big, like a ball lying on top of his head. She had also taken the initiative to let down a ring of his hair, which fell here and there in a messy way. This hairstyle, it was unbearable to look at. Han Shanyu had never been so ugly in his life. This girl did it on purpose, right? She was obviously not a normal person with good hands. He took off the hairpin on top of his head and let the ball of hair fall down again. Comb it again. If you don't do it well, I'll shave your head bald. This was an original threat, but it was very effective on Ning Xuemore. She was someone who liked to look beautiful. If her head became bald, she might as well bang her head against the wall. I really don't know how to. I've never combed anyone's hair. Why don't I call a good maid for you? She believed that many girls would be willing to do this. Han Shanyu looked at her lightly. I only allow concubines to comb my hair. Maids can't do it. So fussy. Ning Xuemore blurted out, then why don't you take a maid to comb your hair as a concubine? None of them are destined to be alone. I can't bear it. Han Shanue's voice was still faint. In other words, he only wanted to harm her. He didn't feel guilty for harming her to death. This bastard really didn't have good intentions towards her. Ning Xuemo was too lazy to talk to him anymore. She combed his hair again. This time, there was a mirror in front of him. He saw Ning Xuemo's every move behind him. He would give her pointers from time to time. In the end, he couldn't stand it and held her wrist to teach her how to do it step by step. His palm was warm and dry, completely wrapping around her small hand. That warmth seemed to be transmitted directly to her body through his palm. Ning Xuemo suddenly felt somewhat hot, and her heart skipped a few beats. Finally, under his guidance, she managed to fix his hair. He looked in the mirror, and nodded, this time's time T. To practice, STTSS hair. TTTTT like the last time. And there was no. This time, she would choose to disguise herself and escape. She had already arranged all her escape routes. She looked at the gourd-shaped hot spring not far away and was puzzled. Is this hot spring natural? Han Shanyu didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, are you going to the altar with me? Or are you going to wait here in the hot spring? Ning Xuemo was worried that he would keep dragging her down. Now that she had a choice, of course, she chose the latter, the hot spring. Chapter 439. Han Shanyu looked at her quietly for a moment and nodded. He opened his hand and a blue fruit appeared in his palm. Eat this fruit. Ning Xuemo looked at him cautiously and took it to take a look. The fruit was the size of a small apple and there was a groove in the middle. There was a layer of light floating on top of it. She had never seen this before. She could not help but sniff it again. There was a faint fishy sweet smell. She had also never smelled this smell before. Don't worry, it's not poisonous. Do I need to poison you to kill you? Han Shanue's voice was as cold as ice. He had pointed out her concerns. Ning Xuemo naturally understood this logic, but this person's thoughts were too hard to guess. Just like how she couldn't guess why he wanted to marry her as a concubine, she also couldn't guarantee that this person wouldn't poison her. It was true that he could easily kill her, but what if this fruit was a poisonous fruit that could turn her into a puppet? Maybe if she ate this fruit, he would completely control her. After all, this fruit did not taste good and it smelled fishy. This fruit is so green, it should not be ripe yet, right? I'll put it away and eat it after it's ripe. Ning Xuemo calmly put the fruit away. Suddenly, her wrist tightened and the fruit flew out of her hand and back into Han Shanue's hand. Ning Xuemo was shocked and could not help but look up. Han Shanyu did not look at her again and ate the fruit in 2 to 3 bites. Then, he glanced at her. This is the sky wind fruit. It is cold in nature and has a similar effect to the ginseng fruit. Drinking this fruit in a hot spring can cleanse the marrow and change the blood. It can expel the impurities in the body and heal all internal injuries. It can increase a mortal's power by 10 years, Ning Xuemo. So this fruit had such a great origin, and it was suitable for her. She couldn't help but hug one of his arms. She looked up at him and asked, do you have more of this fruit? Han Shanyu looked down at her who was hanging on his arm. This was the first time she had taken the initiative to get close to him. Her large eyes were sparkling, and they were filled with longing. The corners of his lips curled up slightly as he replied straightforwardly, no, this is the last one. Hair. Ning Xuemo let go of his arm in disappointment. Looking at the fruit in his hand, her heart was filled with regret. She actually missed out on such a treasure. Do you regret it? Han Shanue's voice was calm. Ning Xuemo's face darkened. She was regretful, but she couldn't let the fruit return to its original state. You're too defensive. You're too cautious. Han Shanyu pointed out the flaw in her personality. Ning Xuemo lowered her eyelashes. If she wasn't cautious enough, she would have died many times in this world. How could it be his turn to lecture him here? Not convinced. Han Shanyu tapped his finger on the jade table in front of him. Ning Xuemo looked up at him. She was too lazy to argue with others, but for some reason, she really wanted to argue with the person in front of her. There are too many malicious things in this world. If I didn't take precautions, What you would see now would probably be Shuemore's skeleton. Han Shanyu narrowed his eyes. He already knew most of what happened to her. Thinking about what she had been through these days, it was true. Once she believed it, she would be doomed eternally. Perhaps even he himself did not realize that his gaze had softened. You cannot believe others, but you should believe me. After all, I am your husband. He was trustworthy. Chapter 440. Ning Shuemore mocked him in her heart. Wasn't he the one who caused most of her problems? Why is he pretending to be kind now? Ning Shuemore found a stool and sat down. She pursed her lips and said, "You said that I was a jinx and was despised by everyone in the city." Han Shanyue's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Although she was despised by everyone in the city, didn't the messy peach blossom engagement disappear as well? You secretly used a technique to seal my acupuncture points and didn't let Shi Tianlong come to save me. I almost drowned in that deep lake. Ning Shuemore continued to complain. Han Shanyu still didn't say anything. His eyes were dark and complicated. He had indeed gone overboard with that matter. However, this girl was too good at seducing men, which made him angry. That was why he couldn't help but teach her a lesson. They said that I was a jinx and wanted to take the opportunity to kill me. I took the crown prince hostage and escaped. Just as I was about to succeed, you helped them to restrain me. Ning Shuemore still felt resentful when she thought of the situation at that time. You can't escape. Han Shanyu finally said. Le Hin Thai trained a group of secret guards with high psychokinesis. As long as you leave the main hall and enter the 9 winding corridors, they will have countless ways to kill you. And they won't hurt Ji Yunhuang. Ning Shuemore was stunned. Don't try to scare me. If Le Hin Thai really had such secret guards, the crown prince would know and he wouldn't let me take him hostage. Ji Yunhuang doesn't know. Han Shanyue's voice was still calm. That is Le Hin Thai's secret weapon. No one knows about it and they only listen to his orders. They can kill the crown prince. Ning Shuemore's heart skipped a beat. Le Hin Thai was a sly old fox. No one would really trust him when he was sitting on the throne. He would even guard against his own son. It wasn't strange for him to have such a secret army. How do you know? Ning Shuemore blurted out. Han Shanyue's lips curled up. What can be hidden from my eyes? He could see where the psychokinesis was moving irregularly. So, when you restrained me, it was for my own good. You finally understand. But if you wanted to save me, you could have taken me in as an art boy or something. Why did it have to be a concubine? This was the part that Ning Shuemore didn't understand the most. If I asked you to be my art boy, would you agree? Of course. Ning Shuemore replied without the slightest hesitation. Under those circumstances, she would have agreed to be his art's art. Han Shanyu tapped the table lightly. Then how could Emperor Le Xian beg you like this? Why did he agree to so many conditions? Ning Shuemore, she suddenly. It turned out that he had proposed such a condition so that she could take revenge on the old emperor. Saying that it all of this for me? It's good that you understand. Han Shanyue's eyes revealed a hint of a smile. He stood up. You can soak in the hot spring here and wait for me to come back. He turned and left. Why, must it be a concubine? Ning Shuemore couldn't help but ask the last question. Why not a wife? Because I only need a concubine. Han Shanyue's feet paused for a moment, but without turning his head, he threw out a blue fruit. Ning Shuemore reached out and caught it. Looking down, she was slightly surprised. Chapter 441. This fruit was exactly the same as the one just now. Could it be that the fruit he ate was just a trick? Ning Shuemore held the fruit with mixed feelings. You don't have to believe others, but you can try to believe me. Han Shanyu threw down these words lightly and left with his sleeves fluttering in the wind. Ning Shuemore ate the fruit and took off her clothes to soak in the hot spring. The bottom of the hot spring was paved with sparkling and translucent jade stones. Stepping on them was like having a foot massage. The sides of the hot spring were also inlaid with jade stones. She felt very comfortable leaning on them. After soaking in the water for a while, she could feel a faint electric current flowing through her 8 extraordinary meridians through the pebbles. After eating the fruit, she felt that her stomach was a little cold, but after soaking in this special hot spring, the cold and hot intertwined and slowly balanced out. The qi in her body flowed faster, as if there was a clear ice spring washing her meridians, driving all the impurities out of her body. This feeling was very comfortable. She soaked in the water like floating clouds. She couldn't help but lean on the edge of the hot spring and close her eyes. She didn't know how long had passed, but she finally felt that the water around her was getting hotter and hotter. She gradually started to feel uncomfortable and opened her eyes. But when she saw her appearance, she was shocked. Her body seemed to be covered with a layer of pale white scales, like some kind of oily mud. God. Although oily mud was expelled from her body when she was meditating, it was a small amount. It wasn't as scary as this. She was shocked when she saw it. She hurriedly looked down into the water. The water reflected her little face. She almost wanted to cover her face. Her little face also had a dense layer. Even the bottom of her hair had a layer. Damn, I can't look anymore. She hurriedly splashed the water to wash off. Not bad, these scales could be washed off slowly as long as she used a little force. She thoroughly washed herself in the hot spring from head to toe, washing off all the scales and oily mud. Finally, her jade-like soft skin was revealed. After thoroughly washing, she found that her skin seemed to be more translucent and smooth. Under the sunlight, it shone like a pearl, making her eyes almost pop out. She couldn't help but splash a handful of water. The water droplets scattered in all directions under the sunlight, shining with a rainbow light. She was only 22 years old in her previous life, an age brimming with enthusiasm. At this moment, her heart was filled with joy, and she finally let go of the uncertainty in her heart, revealing her childlike nature. Ever since she had transmigrated, this was the first time she was so happy. She did not have to worry about anything. She frolicked in the water for a while and examined her entire body. The more she looked, the more she liked it. Over the past few days, she had been injured many times. Her body had been bruised, and there were even a few calluses on her palms. Now, all the scars had disappeared, and her small hands had become incomparably soft and smooth. Not a single callus could be seen, and they were as white and tender as scallions. The effect of the hot spring water was so obvious that she wanted to soak in it for a while longer. However, the hot spring water became hotter and hotter until it became unbearable. Only then did she reluctantly climb out. When she was putting on her clothes, she found another problem. Her clothes were too short and too small. No, it should be that she grew taller again. His body had also truly developed. This caused Shuemor to be very surprised. Chapter 442. Before Ning Shuemor entered the water, she was about 1.6 meters tall. However, after 4 hours of bathing, her height had increased by another 5 or 6 centimeters. Now, she was about 1.6 meters tall. Her chest, which was originally as small as a steamed bun, had increased in size by quite a bit. When she wore her previous clothes, not only were they shorter, her chest was also squeezed uncomfortably. She had only taken a bath, but her body had actually changed so much. Ning Shuemor stood there in a daze for a moment. Obviously, she could not wear this dress anymore. When she entered the Taoist master residence, Han Shanyu had directly brought her to the hot spring. She did not know the layout of the building at all. Where was she going to get another set of clothes? In the Taoist master residence, she did not know if there were any female clothes prepared. Ning Shuemor looked around the shore and her gaze landed on the small cabinet at the side. The small jade cabinet was almost one with the stone table and stool beside it. If she did not look carefully, she would think that it was also a jade decoration. From the cabinet door, a soft white corner of cloth could be seen. Ning Shuemor was enlightened. She ran over and looked at the small cabinet for a long time. The small cabinet looked ordinary on the surface, but Ning Shuemor had already seen that it was an extremely complicated mechanism. If she made a mistake and could not open the cabinet, she was afraid that the mechanism set inside would shoot her into a porcupine. Ning Shuemor was not in a hurry to open the cabinet. Instead, She walked around it in circles. From time to time, she would knock here and there, pressing there. After a while, her finger continuously tapped on the jade cabinet more than 10 times. Her finger was so fast that it was like a flash of light. Finally, with the last tap of her finger, the jade cabinet door slowly opened, revealing a set of clothes inside. The soft silk was smooth to the touch. The style looked simple and elegant, but when she wore it, she looked like a fairy, flowing like the wind. After Ning Xuemore put it on, she was embarrassed. This dress was simply too fitting. It was as if it was made to measure her body. It would be too fat if she added a bit, and too thin if she lost a bit. Obviously, he had prepared this dress for himself. Moreover, he had calculated her figure after the bath in advance. This person was simply abnormally shrewd. Ning Xuemore looked at the spectacular view in front of her chest, and her heart was suddenly moved. Her current figure shouldn't be the figure of a 13-year-old girl, right? Obviously it belonged to a young and beautiful girl. Could this hot spring water have the effect of accelerating the ripening process? If she were to soak in a few more rounds, would she become a middle-aged woman? There was an antique mirror on the stone table. It belonged to Han Shanyu. He did not take it away and left it there casually. This made it convenient for Ning Xuemore. She looked at herself in the mirror and almost dropped it on the floor. The mirror reflected her face from her previous life. It turned out that her face in her previous life was 70 to 80% similar to Ning Xuemore in this life. It was like a miniature cartoon version of his previous life. But now, it was completely the same. She had watery eyes, a straight nose, and cherry blossom-like lips. When she smiled, there was a hint of seduction amidst her innocence. The only difference was that in her previous life, she did not have this coral bean-like snowflake-shaped cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. Her skin was also not as good as it was now. Although her skin was originally soft, there would occasionally be a few small pimples, and 2 or 3 small harmless freckles on her cheeks. But now, those blemishes were all gone. Her skin was like jade, and because she had just taken a bath, her cheeks were slightly flushed. It was even smoother than a baby's skin. Chapter 443. She couldn't help but look at the hot spring. What kind of spring water was this? It actually restored her appearance from her previous life. Right now, she looked like a 16 or 17-year-old girl. She was like a willow branch in spring, about to bloom. She turned around in a circle, her moonlight white dress fluttering in the wind. Under the sunlight, it seemed as if her dress was dancing. Ning Xuemore touched the cloth. She wasn't unfamiliar with it. When she escaped from the Heavenly Book Mountain, she wore a man's robe that was similar to this. No matter how she thought about it, she couldn't remember who had given her this robe. She also didn't know who had helped her and Kirin establish the blood contract. She had all her other memories, but this one was missing. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't remember it. She had asked Kirin, but Kirin was even more confused. At that time, Ning Xuemore faintly understood that her memories of that period of time had been erased by someone else. It was like meeting an immortal in the legends. After leaving the immortal realm, everything in the immortal realm was blurred. She had always treasured that robe. Now that she finally saw the same material, a question slowly arose in her heart. Could it be that she had a deep relationship with Han Shanyu in the Heavenly Book Mountain? Was he the one who established the blood contract with Kirin and gave her the robe? The more she thought about it, the more likely it was. This person's martial arts were too profound. Perhaps he really had reached the first level of the heaven realm. Could it be that he and the ancestor were the same kind of people? Or perhaps they were originally the same person? She shook her head, thinking that it was impossible. The ancestor didn't seem to be that free. Moreover, the ancestor was said to be otherworldly. He definitely wouldn't want to take in a concubine. This didn't make sense. Perhaps this master Han Shanyu was really a hermit, just not as flashy as the ancestor. She raised her head to look at the sky. The sky was high and the clouds were light. The sky was blue like a mirror. The sun had already moved to the center of the sky. It was almost noon. At this time, he should be on the altar to worship the heavens. Lahin Thai had created such a huge scene for the worship of the heavens this time. Those soldiers and what not would definitely be guarding the altar. The defenses in other places would definitely be lax. This was the best time for her to escape. If she missed this opportunity, she might not have another chance in the future. She lowered her eyes and looked at the beautiful dress she was wearing. She sighed inwardly. This dress was beautiful, but it was too eye-catching. If she wore this dress on the streets, she would obviously become the center of attention. It was better to find another dress to wear. Ning Xuemore ran out without even realizing it. When she was about to run out of the courtyard's moon gate, she seemed to have bumped into something transparent. However, before she could react, her body had already passed through. She turned around and looked at the door in surprise. There was nothing on it. Was that an illusion? Master. Kireen appeared out of nowhere. Just as she was about to jump into Lin Sanju's arms, she paused and looked at Lin Sanju with her big eyes. Master, you're finally out. I thought you had fainted inside and was extremely worried. Why don't you go in and take a look? Ning Xuemore was puzzled. There is a barrier in this courtyard. If I go in, he will definitely notice me. He threatened me not to go in. Otherwise, he will send me to some barren mountain or river to train. He won't let me see Master again. Kireen felt even more wronged. Ning Xuemore was speechless. Chapter 444. So it was not an illusion when she felt like she had passed through a transparent film. There was indeed a wizardry barrier. She could not help but turn around and walk towards the moon cave door. She carefully touched it, but she could not feel anything. She even walked back inside, but she did not feel anything blocking her. Could it be that she had broken through the wizardry barrier? It was too much like a soap bubble. Too fragile, too weak. Wait, if he could sense her breaking through the wizardry barrier, did that mean he had already sensed her running out? He told her to wait inside obediently. She and Kireen looked at each other. Master, are we still going? Ning Xuemore made up her mind. Let's go. The heaven worship platform was located near the Imperial Ancestral Temple. The platform was tall and majestic, and it was completely built with white marble. Below the heaven worship platform, Lahin Thai led the civil and military officials to stand on both sides. Surrounding the civil and military officials were soldiers with weapons in their hands, who were under orders to protect them. They kept all the citizens at the very outside. There was a sea of people. It was really a sea of people. Almost all the citizens in the capital came out to watch the bustling scene. Perhaps it was because the order was maintained well. Although there were 3 layers of people around the heaven worship platform, it was not particularly noisy. Almost everyone held their breaths as they looked at the person on the platform. Han Shanyu stood there in his wide white robe. The wind made his robe dance, and he looked like he was riding the wind. On both sides of the platform, there were 18 Daoist children in dark blue robes. They were holding a horsetail whisk, and all of them looked handsome and solemn. The positions they stood in were also carefully chosen. If one looked down from the sky, they would see that this formation was like a 6-sided snowflake, and it just so happened that Han Shanyu was in the center. It was almost noon, and the sun slowly moved to the center of the sky, shining right on top of Han Shanyue's head. Han Shanyue's white robe was fluttering. He was clearly under the sun, but there seemed to be white snow swirling around him, and it seemed to contain a huge amount of energy. The people below the platform wanted to submit to him, and they wanted to worship him. He seemed to be preparing for some kind of ceremony. His posture was calm and elegant, and his every move seemed to have a strange rhythm. There were quite a few women in the crowd below the stage. They stared at the stage in a daze, their eyes glued to the man in white on the stage, unwilling to even blink. This great master had obviously used some kind of spell. No one could see his face clearly, but his figure and a few movements were enough to stun all living beings, causing them to willingly sink into oblivion. Finally, it was noon and the sun shone down. Suddenly, the world seemed to darken, and the sunlight seemed to condense into a beam. The surroundings were dark, and only the high platform was bright. There seemed to be layers of golden light flickering. Everyone below the stage held their breaths as if they had seen a legendary god. One after another, they knelt down. The golden light on the stage was like the light of Buddha. After it condensed on the stage for a moment, it spread out in all directions like water ripples. The light of Buddha spread rapidly inch by inch and gradually spread to the surrounding people who were kneeling down piously. Everyone felt an indescribable sense of comfort as the warm sun shone upon them. Their hearts also felt as if they were soaked in warm water, peaceful and peaceful. Specks of snowflake-like light swirled in the Buddha's light, making people feel as if they had entered the sweetest dream. Excitement, joy, peace. The people who were illuminated by the light of Buddha began to burst into joyful cheers. As the light of Buddha expanded, the cheers became louder and louder. In the end, it was earth-shattering. It was like a landslide or a tsunami, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Chapter 445. Han Shanyu stood motionless on the stage. Just as the cheers were about to erupt, he clapped his hands together. The crowd's cheers seemed to be surrounded by an inexplicable force, condensing into a line. It was as if a dragon of sound flew into the sky, in a cave in the heavenly Book Mountain. A red-clothed man was sitting in the flickering hall, playing an ice-blue guqin. Around him were 8 young women in their prime. These 8 women were also wearing red dresses. Although their faces were different, they all had a pair of small and delicate hands. One look and you could tell that they were the kind of hands that played the zither. Delicate and white. In fact, no matter what their identities were, they all had one thing in common. They were all zither experts. They were the female leads in the case of the missing girls in the city. At this moment, they were sitting in 8 different positions. Their posture was also the posture of playing the zither. They clearly did not have zithers on their knees, but they were all playing the zither. Following their movements, there seemed to be some kind of soft chi coming out from their fingertips. It swirled around and flowed towards the ice-blue zither on the man's knees. The zither was a 7-stringed zither. It was unknown what material the strings were made of, but they were also sky blue. There was a faint light flickering on the strings. Among the 7 strings, one of them was obviously dim in color, as if its charm had been sucked away and it was heavily injured. The soft chi coming out from the 8 women's fingers flowed towards the dim zither string. As the chi of the 8 women poured into the zither string seemed to be injected with vitality. Its color finally began to gradually brighten and recover bit by bit. As for the 8 women, their chi seemed to be slowly sucked away. Their faces became paler and paler. Their faces were blank. It was obvious that they were being controlled by the sound of the man in red zither. Their fingers were mechanically playing the zither, but their eyes were filled with horror. They could not control themselves. As the chi in their bodies was slowly sucked away by the zither, their long black hair began to dry up and slowly turned white. Their originally soft and smooth skin began to lose its elasticity at a speed visible to the naked eye. Wrinkles also began to appear, more and more. The color of the damaged zither string was finally returning to its original luster. At this rate of recovery, the zither string would be able to return to its original glory in less than an hour. The red-clothed man's forehead was covered in sweat. He stared at the strings with a warm expression. He was finally going to recover. Pride and satisfaction appeared in his eyes. He just had to hold on for another hour. Just an hour was enough. A pale white light flashed from the outside. Suddenly, the strange sound of landslides and tsunamis rushed into the cave. In an instant, it drowned out the sound of the zither. Not only was the sound loud, it also contained an extremely strong yang qi. It rushed in like a huge dragon, and the entire cave suddenly lit up. It was as if a super bright signal flare had been set off, so bright that no one could open their eyes. The women seemed to have woken up from a dream. Their bodies swayed, and their hands stopped moving. Bang! The string that had just recovered finally snapped. The string bounced off the back of the red-clothed man's hand and then disappeared. The red-robed man sat there in a daze. He lowered his eyes and looked at the back of his hand. A line of blood slowly flowed out from the open wound. It was bright red and enchanting. Hey, why am I here? Ah, where is this place? Heavens, who are you? You're so ugly. Chapter 446. The women had already stood up. They were obviously not in the right state of mind. They looked around with a face full of surprise. When they saw each other's faces, they screamed again. Every young girl had now turned into a white-haired, wrinkled old woman. At first, they were only shocked by each other. When they realized that something was wrong with them, they touched their cheeks and looked at their hands. Then, they screamed in disbelief. The cave was in chaos for a moment. After the women screamed, their eyes fell on the man in red sitting there. The man in red half closed his eyes and looked at the Guqin on his knees. He did not hear the women's screams. Saint Master, what is going on? Saint Master, please say something. Where are we? Didn't you say you were going to teach me the most amazing Guqin skills? Saint Master will not teach an ugly monster like you. Saint Master said he was going to teach me. The women started to quarrel again. The man in red slowly raised his head. When the women saw his face, they opened their eyes wide in shock. Saint Master, what happened to you? The man in red had blood on his lips. His pair of spring green eyes were also blood red. He smiled slowly and said, "You are too noisy." His voice was gentle, but his actions were ruthless. He made a move with his palm. His body was still in the same place, but the 8 women seemed to have their necks grabbed and flew to the stone wall behind them. Then, they unwillingly kicked their legs and stopped moving. The man in red kept his Guqin and slowly stood up. His face was as pale as a ghost, but his eyes were as red as a demon's. He wiped the blood on his lips, coughed twice, and walked out. As he walked out, the cave behind him rumbled and collapsed. In the end, the entire cave disappeared, and the mountain wall returned to its original state. Who would have thought that there were 8 women with great Guqin skills buried in this solid cliff? The man in red coughed twice and looked up at the sky. The sky was clear, and the sun was slightly away from the center. The man in red slowly clenched his fingers in his sleeves. Han Shan Yu. Who the hell is this guy? He was actually able to counter his soul-chasing zither. Not only did he ruin his plan that day, but he also ruined his plan to restore the zither strings today. Who would have thought that he, Shui Ilan, would encounter such a powerful opponent in the human world? This was truly beyond his expectations. That person was actually able to mobilize the yang qi of the people in the city to fight against him. Not only did it destroy another string of his zither, it also injured him. This place was obviously not safe, so he had to leave first, on the altar. The thunderous applause and cheers finally stopped, and the world regained its former brightness. The white-robed, black-haired heavenly master had a calm expression on his face. He stood upright like a mountain and walked down the high platform step by step. The crowd automatically dispersed to the sides like a tide, and then knelt down and kowtowed again. If he had any doubts about this heavenly master's ability in the past, all his doubts were swept away now. This heavenly master had the power to change the world. With such a heavenly master in the vast sky nation, why would they be afraid of demons and monsters? This heavenly master's ability is probably not inferior to that of the most mysterious overlord, right? Everyone's face was filled with fanatical joy, and they could only kneel down and kowtow to express their respect. Le Hin Thai was naturally elated. Chapter 447. Le Hin Thai was naturally elated. Suddenly, she felt that the humiliation of agreeing to Ning Xuemo's conditions was worth it. He led the civil and military officials to greet Han Shan Yu. Han Shan Yu nodded slightly and said, "The Guqin demon will not come for the next 2 months." Le Hin Thai's eyes lit up. He had been on tenterhooks for the past few days. He always felt that the red-clothed Guqin demon's blade of death was hanging over his head and would fall at any moment. It was not an ordinary worry. Hearing Han Shanyue's words, he let out a sigh of relief. He actually wanted to ask if there was a way to permanently get rid of that scourge. But Han Shanyu only glanced at him and he shivered inwardly. He did not dare to ask again. However, in any case, the red-clothed Guqin demon would not come for the time being. He and the civil and military officials could sleep peacefully for the next 2 months. Not far away was the carriage specially prepared for the heavenly master. Han Shanyu rejected the banquet that Le Hin Thai had specially prepared for him. His sleeves fluttered as the people on both sides bowed to him and walked directly to his carriage. After getting on the carriage, he raised his hand and looked at the unremarkable jade ring on his finger. The ring, which was originally lustrous and glossy, was now somewhat dull. It was as if the outer layer of the ring had been broken. She did not listen to him and ran away. She broke the enchantment when he was concentrating on casting the spell and almost caused him to be injured. Was it a coincidence? Or did she do it on purpose? He lowered his eyes for a moment and took out a talisman from nowhere. When the talisman faintly lit up, he asked, "Where is she now?" A crisp voice immediately came from the talisman. Reporting to Di, she has already left the city. The Chilean divine beast has changed into a horse. A blue horse. No, Di, she should have put on makeup for the Chilean divine beast and changed its fur color. It is now a red horse. Red horse. Han Shanyu pursed his lips. It seemed that she was very fond of red. Di, she has also changed her appearance. She now looks like an ordinary man. She was accompanied by a man. The charm continued to report to him. Han Shanyu didn't say anything, but the temperature in the carriage seemed to have dropped. Di, do you want to capture her? A moment later, Han Shanyue's cold voice rang out, "No need, let her be." The other party didn't seem to have expected such an answer. After a pause, he said, "Then this subordinate will continue to follow her. If necessary, no need." Han Shanyu spoke two short words again. His voice was flat as he added a few more words, "Don't bother about her anymore." "Yes." The other side responded. The voice transmission talisman dimmed and returned to Han Shanyue's palm. He supported his head with his hand and closed his eyes. "Ning Xuemo, you missed this opportunity. I hope you won't regret it in the future." Just as the carriage drove out of the crowd, a shadow glided across the sky. Amidst the surprised cries of the crowd, a beautiful long-necked white swan descended and landed not far in front of the carriage, blocking its path. Who dared to block the path of the new celestial master? Everyone turned to look at the gigantic white swan, and they were all stunned. Two people jumped down from the back of the white swan. One of them was an old man with a white beard. He had a ruddy complexion and white hair. The other person was a young girl who looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. Her appearance could only be described with one word: stunningly beautiful. Chapter 448. Two people jumped down from the back of the white swan. One of them was an old man with a white beard. He had a youthful complexion and white hair, looking like a sage. The other person was a young girl who looked to be around 15 or 16 years old. Her appearance could only be described with one word: exceedingly beautiful. There were countless young girls present, and there was no lack of beauties. However, compared to this young girl, no matter how beautiful she would feel inferior. Her hair covered her forehead, and her eyebrows were slender. She was elegant and refined, as if she was isolated from the secular world. What was even rarer was that this young girl's body seemed to be surrounded by a faint layer of mist. Some of the more knowledgeable people exclaimed in a low voice, "Earth Stage Level 7. She has already cultivated to Earth Stage Level 7. Their voices were filled with disbelief. Only when one's psychokinesis reached Earth Stage Level 7 would there be such a layer of mist around the cultivator's body. One had to know that even the peerless genius Ji Yunhuang had only cultivated to Earth Stage Level 4. And this young girl looked like she had just reached marriageable age. How could she have such profound martial arts? Who was she? Who was she? When did such a young peerless genius appear on this continent? Countless people's gazes fell on the young girl, and they all began to guess. They also did not know the purpose of these two people appearing here. The carriage stopped, and the Daoist child leading the way was about to ask the two why they were blocking the way. The old man cupped his hands towards the carriage and said, "Is this Master Han? The master of the Tianqing Castle wishes to see you." "Grandpa." Tianqing Castle. Gasps could be heard from the crowd. The Tianqing Castle was the second largest family on this continent. Its reputation was not inferior to the wise king's mansion. It was also passed down through the family. Although its reputation was below the wise king's mansion, in the hearts of the people on this continent, the Tianqing castle was more respected than the wise king's mansion. There was no other reason. The Tianqing castle had many alchemists, many godly doctors. According to modern times, they were a family of godly doctors. In this world, doctors were a very rare profession, and those who could be called godly doctors were even rarer. However, almost everyone in the Tianqing castle studied medicine, and everyone was a genius in this field. Their extremely mysterious secret recipe was said to be able to revive even the dead. When Ji Yunhuang was heavily injured, Le Hin Thai had also tried to go to the Tianqing castle to ask for help. However, the Tianqing castle was too far away from the vast Sky Empire, so before the vast Sky Empire's envoy could reach the Tianqing castle, Ji Yunhuang had already been treated by Ning Xuemo. Doctors were people that no one in this world wanted to offend. Naturally, Tianqing castle was even more so. Normally, any servant sent by the Tianqing castle would be treated as a VIP by the nobles of the various countries. But now, the lord of the Tianqing castle, who rarely showed his face in the martial arts world, had personally appeared. Then the young girl beside him must also have an extraordinary background, right? Also, this Mr. Han's background is too great. The lord of the Tianqing castle also bowed to him respectfully. One had to know that this old man was famous in the Jianghu for having his eyes on the top of his head and looking down on everyone. "What's the matter?" Han Shanue's cold voice finally came from inside the carriage. "Mr. Han, is it convenient for you to come out and meet me? This old man has a treasure to offer." The lord of the Tianqing castle continued to bow. The young girl beside him blushed slightly and pursed her lips. She seemed to be a bit embarrassed and a bit annoyed. The beauty was angry, and under the sunlight, her beauty was shocking. Many of the men present were dumbfounded by this scene. A treasure that the lord of the Tianqing castle personally gave out must be shocking. Everyone looked at the empty-handed lord of the Tianqing castle, and then looked at the young girl beside him. Some people were lucky and suddenly guessed what was going on. Could it be that the lord of the Tianqing castle wanted to offer this young girl to the new heavenly teacher? Chapter 449. Luck with Women. What luck with women? But the heavenly master didn't seem to be interested in women. In all these years, he had only asked for a marriage once, and the person he asked for was Ning Xuemo, but the girl in front of them was a rare beauty. No man could resist her charms, right? The heavenly master had just taken in Ning Xuemo, so it was not impossible for him to take in another one. Everyone's curiosity was ignited, and they all looked at the tightly shut carriage. It's not convenient. No one expected Han Shanyu to give such a straightforward answer. He seemed to have given some order to the child driving the carriage, and the child started the carriage again. The lord of the Tianqing castle also didn't expect such an answer, and was stunned. He didn't dare to block the carriage's path, and could only move to the side. However, he didn't give up, and couldn't help but say, "Master Han, I am here to repay my debt. I will never forget the debt of saving my life. This treasure was specially prepared for you, and I have raised her for 18 years. Now that she has matured, I dare to present her to you." When he said this, it was obvious what the gift was. The girl's face turned even redder, and she bit her lips even harder. Her cherry-red lips were almost white from her biting. Le Hin Thai also heard the guard's report, and rushed over with the crown prince. Le Hin Thai's face didn't look too good at first. When he heard the guard say that the lord of the Tianqing castle had come all the way here to give Han Shanyu a gift, he felt that something was wrong. He was afraid that the gift was too valuable, and that the heavenly master would be taken away by the Tianqing castle again. When he got closer, he heard the lord of the Tianqing castle say something about repaying his debt, and he let out a sigh of relief. He was only here to repay his debt, and not to take him away. As long as he wasn't here to steal his girl, then it was good. His face finally returned to normal. He was also an old fox, and when he heard the lord of the Tianqing castle, he knew that the gift was the girl, and couldn't help but look at her. Ah, this girl's appearance wasn't any worse than the current Ning Xuemo. It could be said that the spring orchids and autumn chrysanthemums all had their own characteristics. But what was with the 18 years of nurturing? And it was specially prepared for Han Shanyu. Then, he thought of the Tianqing castle's medicine refining skills, and a bold idea suddenly floated into his mind. Could it be that this girl was a cauldron specifically for men to use to replenish their yang? Legend had it that there was such a woman in the world who could practice a special kind of martial arts and had special abilities. Her cultivation may not be very high, but once she had intercourse with a man through a special method, she could greatly increase her psychokinesis. It was more effective than any elixir. However, in this world, there were very few women who possessed such a physique. Even Le Hin Thai, who was used to seeing beauties, had only heard of them but had never seen one. Now, he couldn't help but size up the girl again. His heart was moved again. If this girl was a super big cauldron, then she would be a good match for his son. Perhaps his son's martial arts would recover soon, and he might even be better than before. He glanced at Ji Yunhuang, who was beside him. This brat had been gloomy for the past few days. He had always been a man of few words, but he had been scarily silent these past few days. According to the reports of the servants, this precious son of his would often get drunk in the middle of the night. Many times, when he came to see his father, he reeked of alcohol. Chapter 450. At this moment, Ji Yunhuang, who had been expressionless all this while, also looked at the young girl. His eyes seemed to flicker. Could it be that this brat had fallen for this young girl? Le Hin Thai did not know if he was happy or worried. This son of his was a genius and had always been arrogant. He did not care about any woman. It was with great difficulty that his heart was moved, and it was still towards that heavenly calamitous lonely star Ning Xuemo. Even he could not stop him. Fortunately, that jinx had been chosen by the heavenly master. Although they were not married yet, his son obviously could not have any thoughts about her. Thus, he was relieved. He was also afraid that his son would not like any woman in the future and be single for the rest of his life. Thus, he had been intentionally or unintentionally stuffing his son with women. There were all kinds of beauties. However, his son did not even look at them and rejected them all. Now, he had finally noticed a woman. Moreover, this woman's background was not bad. If she was matched to his son, it would be a good match. If she was indeed a tripod, then it would be even better. The only thing that worried him was that this young girl was offered by the Tianqing castle to the heavenly master. If the heavenly master accepted her, then his son would have no hope. Le Hin Thai's thoughts changed in an instant. Heavenly Master Han Shanyu in the carriage seemed to have been moved. The carriage actually stopped. The Tianqing castle lord's eyes lit up. Le Hin Thai's heart was in his mouth. Ji Yunhuang's eyes also lit up slightly. He quietly took a step forward. If Han Shanyu agreed to accept this girl, did that mean that he was not determined to get Ning Xuemo? Perhaps he would agree to cancel his engagement with Ning Xuemo. Ji Yunhuang's hands that were hidden in his sleeves were tightly clenched. He stared at the carriage and his fingertips turned pale. The carriage door finally opened slowly, revealing Han Shanyue's figure. He did not come out of the carriage. Because the outside was brighter than the inside, she could only see his outline. The young girl in green suddenly raised her head and looked into the carriage. She could faintly see the figure of a tall and straight man. She could not see his face clearly. She could feel the other party's gaze on her. That gaze was cold and sharp. She instantly shuddered and lowered her head. Her heart was beating wildly. He pursed his lips tightly again. Ever since she was young, she knew that she was a cauldron weapon. Furthermore, she was a cauldron weapon made from special herbs. She was specially prepared for a man named Han Shanyu. Every day, she was forced to practice martial arts. Every day, she was soaked in boiling hot or cold medicinal water. The food she ate was also refined from herbs. Her life was dull and uninteresting, and she couldn't describe how she felt about Han Shanyu. Hatred, disgust, curious, nervous. It seems that every emotion has some. She thought that this Han Shanyu would be an old man, but she didn't expect him to be such a cold and elegant person. Her heart was beating wildly, but she had no choice but to lower her head. She knew that Han Shanyu would take her in. After all, this great master also knew medicine. He knew how rare and hard it was to get a spirit medicine woman from the Tianqing castle, and how beneficial she was to him. Spiritual medicine woman? Han Shanyu finally opened his mouth again. He was indeed someone who knew what was good for him. That's right. The Tianqing castle lord revealed a proud expression. He was still very respectful. This girl is this old man's youngest daughter. Not only does she meet the requirements of being a spirit medicine woman, but she is also a genius in telekinesis. Her telekinesis has already reached Earth rank level 2, and her effects are even stronger. His tone did not sound like he was talking about his daughter's merits, but rather like he was promoting medicine. Chapter 451. The girl in green had already lowered her head, and her face was pale from embarrassment. So she was Earth rank level 2, but what was with the layer of smoke surrounding her? Was it something that only elixir ladies would have? Everyone was making unkind guesses. Many men were drooling as they looked at the girl. Treasure. It was indeed an exceptional treasure. No man would be able to reject such a treasure. Everyone's gaze fell on the carriage again. Tian Xingyu, are you really giving her to me? No matter what I ask her to do. Han Shanyu finally spoke. The lord of Tianqing castle was called Tian Xingyu. His eyes lit up and he immediately bowed. Yes. Good, I'll accept her. Han Shanyu made the final decision. Although this was within their expectations, everyone still sucked in a few breaths. How would this great master arrange for this girl to be his concubine? Would her status be higher or lower than that of the heavenly calamity star? Le Xian Emperor's face was filled with disappointment. There was no hope for his son again. Ji Yunhuang's eyes lit up. He stepped forward and was about to say something when Han Shanyu spoke again. Tian Xingyu, what do you want from me? Since you sent your daughter here, I can promise you one more thing. Tian Xingyu's eyes lit up. He immediately lowered his head and said, Thank you, sir. I don't have anything to ask of you for now. I just hope that you can promise me that if Tianqing Castle is in trouble, you will help me once more. Han Shanyu said indifferently, If it doesn't go against the heavens, I will help you once. Tian Xingyu nodded. Of course, of course. I know your bottom line. I definitely won't go against the heavens. Xingqing, why aren't you greeting your husband? The girl was called Tian Xueqing. Even her neck seemed to have turned red. She stepped forward and was about to bow to Han Shanyu. Han Shanyu spoke again. Wait, I'm not your husband. This sentence shocked everyone. Everyone looked at Han Shanyu in shock. Tian Xueqing also froze. She didn't know if she should bow or not. Mr. Han, what do you mean? Tian Xingyu was also very puzzled. Han Shanyu said indifferently, Since you gave her to me, then it should have nothing to do with you if I give her to someone else, right? Tian Xingyu choked on his words. This is naturally unrelated. He had already given out the gift, so he really couldn't say anything about who the other party wanted to give the gift to. Han Shanyu no longer looked at him. His gaze landed on Ji Yunhuang, who was already standing at the front of the group. Ji Yunhuang's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to retreat, but Han Shanyu had already spoken. Miss Xueqing should serve Crown Prince Ji Yunhuang from now on. He is the one for you. Ji Yunhuang's expression changed greatly. His originally pale face became even paler. He opened his mouth and was about to say no. Unexpectedly, his back suddenly went numb, and his mind was suddenly in a mess. He couldn't help but say, Yes, thank you, Heavenly Master. When the green-clothed girl heard that she was being transferred to another place, her face turned pale. However, when she heard Ji Yunhuang agree, she couldn't help but turn her head to look at him. When she saw Ji Yunhuang's face clearly, her eyes slightly lit up. Her cheeks flushed red as she lowered her head. It was obvious that she was willing to do so. Le Hin Thai felt as if he had been hit by a golden pie. He immediately laughed. Good. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.